know exist. It's like a perk in the talk of the sea. Money swollen like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion new single, my hater, don't be better. Put on the road, I just spit. I know we got $1 million. The devil, that shit ain't not cheaper than
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 5th part of What If Deku Helps His Best Friend, Peter Parker. Smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. You snapped awake, leaping out of bed as an almighty crash reverberated through the walls. She was not a light sleeper by any standard. Even after going through a hero course, heavy sleeping was never a habit that she ever shook off, which is why she invested far too much yen into an alarm clock guaranteed to wake even her up. Hero work was exhausting after all, and some days she hit the hay harder than her old classmates hit the bar. Nevertheless, the day before was a good day. No major outbreaks, and the only thing to tire her out was Shinji's ranting over something she forgot. Maybe that's why the sound of something shattering against the living room wall shot her straight out of bed. Was it a burglar? In her apartment, home invasions weren't uncommon, but there was nothing she had that was worth. Peter, she cried. Adrenaline woke her up faster than any coffee could have managed. She was out of her room in a flash, slamming on the lights, eyes darting straight to the door, the window. Nothing was open, no one had gotten in. But there was Peter on his knees, the shattered remains of his dingy little alarm clock cracking the drywall. He gasped for air, cold sweat dripping down his face. Then he saw you. Whatever color was left in him vanished, his eyes wide and red. Why you? I am so. He stopped as you swooped down upon him, wrapping him in her arms. Peter flinched in surprise, but as the moments passed, he relaxed into her embrace. Sorry for waking you, Peter whispered in English. You shook her head. Hey. It's all right. She pulled away, holding the boy at arm's length, smiling tremulously. She tried to smile, hiding her disquiet. His clothes were clammy with sweat. What had happened to him? Peter shivered, eyes dropping to the floor, and you forced herself to swallow the lump in her throat. Do you want some tea? She asked, forcing the smile back. Fragile as the offer was, it snapped Peter into looking at her. And Peter, ever the kind boy, waved his hands nervously. Why, you don't have to do that. But you're still cold. He wasn't. He felt like he was on fire. But you didn't let that show. You're getting tea. But, no buts, you said, her voice filled with an authority that she didn't know she had. If Peter's wide eyes were anything to go by, he was just as surprised. Knowing better than to argue, he picked himself off the floor and followed you to the kitchen. He sat at the kitchen counter as you got to work on the teapot. He didn't say anything, his usual quippy mouth dry for what had to be a long time. Problem? Definitely, but what was she supposed to say? She's supposed to ask what's going on, right? Or did that just make it worse? She tapped the edge of the pot nervously, stealing glances at Peter. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the table. No, couldn't get much worse than this. She shook her head. What was she thinking? All Might talked and smiled all the time. She just needed to do that and it'll all be better, right? So, you started, her commanding manner gone. How's school? A beat passed before he answered. It's fine. You nodded. That's good. She tapped the pot, and when she glanced back, Peter still hadn't looked up. Okay, so what now? Was she doing this wrong? What was she saying? Of course she was. Just be like All Might. Fat chance. If just smiling and talking was all that she needed to do, she'd be the #1 hero by now. God, why didn't she pay attention in class? They had to have something on talking to people in distress. A big smile wouldn't do everything, but that's all she had. She gripped the handle of the pot till her knuckles went white. Get a grip, you can do this. You said you could do this. The words only made her shoulders slump, something that she was grateful that Peter didn't notice. Silly thought. He'd seen her walk into the apartment drained of everything she had, flopping on her couch looking like a wreck. He'd seen her mess up on making eggs in the morning, and looking unsupportive worried her. The pot steamed, and you nearly jumped out her skin. She stifled a yelp and did her best to finish up the drink while Peter kept staring down at the dingy counter. He only looked up when she finally sat down, tea mugs in hand. He gingerly took his drink when you offered, and sipped at it, cringing a little at the taste. The blonde tried not to feel too offended. This was her best tea after all. Still not a tea drinker? You asked with a slight smile. Peter shook his head, chuckling nervously. Not really a tea guy, I guess. You'll grow into it. You waved it off. Peter snorted, giving her a wry look. Trying to convert me. Japan is trying to convert you, you corrected. I'm just her humble servant in a noble quest. Peter pursed his lips. You're gonna be here a while then. I can wait, she said. For anything. Peter nodded, a little bit of that light coming back to him. Sorry about the clock. Freaked out. About what? You asked on reflex. Peter recoiled, sinking into his chair, that little light snuffed out. You wanted to punch herself. Why did she have to be here? Anyone would have been better. Shinji could handle this better. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, she said quickly. I mean, everyone's got their secrets. I mean, this one time Phew, Peter whispered. She could barely hear him, but that one word stopped her dead. He looked up, a sad smile that didn't belong on his face, but was there regardless. It looked too old for someone like him, and the sight of it almost brought you to tears. This isn't the first time I've woken up like this, he admitted. You gripped her cup, shifting once again. See, can I help? She asked. Peter looked at her for a moment before shaking his head and looking down. I don't think you can. A knife twisted in Yu's chest. She steeled herself and leaned in, causing the boy to blink in mute surprise. I can try, she promised. She reached over, taking one of his hands in hers. She gave it a soft squeeze and waited. He stared down at the hand. Something flashed through his mind, and he wiped something out of his eyes. What is it? She asked. Peter didn't meet her gaze. He shook his head. It's nothing. Just before I got to Japan, I was in a fight. He stopped, and a bark of mirthless laughter escaped him, and I couldn't do anything. He pulled away and ran a hand through his hair again. You bit her inner cheek. She remembered back at the station, eavesdropping in and listening through the interview Botan was having with Peter. Spaceships, quirkless worlds yet had technology that put this world to shame. Wizards, aliens, magical rocks formed from the Big Bang. It was still impossible to comprehend, even now nearly a year later. We could have won, we were so close. We had everything. Doctor Strange, Mr. Stark, the Guardians, we were holding him back. Every time he pulled something we came right back. And we almost won, but then everything fell apart, he said cryptically. I put my all into it. I did everything I could. And then He shook, and when he looked up, you gasped at the tears on his face. I can still feel him winning, choking me, and he was petrified. What on earth had he been through? Who were these people he described? And who or what had they been fighting? She jumped out of her chair and stalked over. She gripped both her hands on his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. Peter, listen to me. Whatever it is, he won't come. And even if he did, we'll deal with him. He clearly didn't believe her. His eyes were old, burned out, their light drowned by a horror he could not describe. She gripped a little harder, hiding her doubts, forcing her voice not to crack. You're here, and whatever he is, we'll deal with him. Every pro will stop him from coming back. Kamui Woods, your teachers, All Might, everyone. She forward, pulling him into the tightest hug she'd ever given him. No one is going to hurt you, I promise. Peter stiffened in her grasp, and for a second, he didn't move, only to nod resolutely into her shoulder. She patted once and jerked her head back to the couch. Get some sleep, okay? All right. Thanks you. Don't mention it, buddy. Peter shrugged but followed her advice. He wobbled over to the couch and threw the covers over himself. You cleaned the cups and went straight to her own bed. She dropped inside for all she was worth. Now she felt so much older. She was going to be a mess when she woke up. An extra cup of coffee would have to do. This was worth it. All the while, Peter lay awake, gripping his pillow, trying not to remember that last battle and that face. Little insect. Peter left early the next morning, yawning like it was going out of style. Another bad night, another hard morning. Except this one hit. Maybe the hardest he's ever had. He ate some MG Ronalds en route to the bus stop along with sipping some coffee. Once aboard, he stared out of the window, barely noticing the city beyond. The coffee didn't help like before, not even close. He saw his reflection with the red, bleary eyes. He rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, giving himself a quick slap to wake up. It lasted a second before the urge to yawn came right back. The bus came to a complete stop, and the students began to file out. Peter followed on, using the bars to pull himself up as he got off. The world was blurry, unfocused, as Peter took long deep breaths through his nose. Time to take the stairs. Oh, he's already inside. That was fast. He took step by step, looking down as he gripped the stair rail. Why was he feeling so drained? Why couldn't he get any sleep? It was those nightmares, of course. They had been getting worse and worse, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could go without sleep. He'd hoped not to bother you at least, but that ship had sailed, and she had seen a side of him he had hoped to keep hidden for months. He hated that. She had enough on her plate being a pro hero without his issues. Peter tripped, missing a step and stumbling before catching himself. He shook his head. This was getting beyond a joke. Peter jumped, eyes wide as he looked around. There behind him was the blonde and blue-eyed pony, pouting in evident annoyance. I was calling for you for over a minute, she complained in English. What was, oh geez, are you okay? Her annoyance turned to worry as she saw the state he was in. I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well last night. More like over the last year. I can tell you're looking a little like that scary Mr. Aizawa. Hey, he's not that scary, Peter said. Then he grimaced, remembering the quirk tests, and Pony raised an accusing eyebrow. Okay, he's a little scary. Little scary. Have you heard the rumors? Pony was incredulous. They say he's a secret ninja that stalks his targets, learning everything about them before bam he strikes. Peter stared at his friends. Enthusiasm. Mr. Aizawa, a secret ninja. Mr. Aizawa, who only got out of his sleeping bag when he absolutely had to. His eyes fluttered shut, forcing him to bite his cheek to stay awake. Geez, just thinking about a nap made him tired. Wow, you really are tired. You wanna go out sometime another day? Maybe on Sunday. Oh, the taiyaki, right. Peter shook his head a little. I think I could do it, yeah. Maybe they can have maybe coffee or an espresso ice cream or something. I dunno. You sure you wanna go after school? She tilted her head. Maybe we can bring some friends. If that works, Peter offered. Like me, said a new voice in accented English. Both Pony and Peter looked up the stairs to see a smirking Setsuna leaning against the rail. Yo, Parker. Pony. She reverted back to her native tongue. Pony puffed her cheeks. You can't just invite yourself talkage. The horned girl reprimanded. The lizard-eyed girl didn't seem to mind as she focused on Peter. Must have been cramming for last night or something, Parker, she asked, picking up on his haggard eyes. Ooh, yeah, Peter lied. Worked on calligraphy. Still gotta brush up on characters. Tell me about it. But I can see on roping in some other students in class 1B and maybe we can make this a nice social outing. She put her hands on her hips. Vlad-sensei wants us to compete with class 1A to outdo, since last semester 1B's freshmen didn't do so hot. But nothing wrong with being friends with competition. She put her arm around Pony, smiling widely. Right. Pony's ears fluffed up and she looked away. I guess. I have a feeling you'll just come along anyway. The greenette giggled, poking Pony on the nose. Only a few days and you know me well, Tsunotori. And Parker, I recommend getting some scented candles or listening to music or sounds of the ocean. That helps lure me to sleep. She waved her hand. In any case, we should head to class, Pony. We're doing hero courses early. Oh yeah, that's right, we're doing the thing. Pony perked up. Well, we'll catch each other later, Peter. My schedule is a bit off since we're doing hero courses first, and then all of our normal classes later. Yeah, class A usually has its hero class after lunch, replied Peter as the two climbed to the top of the stairs and walked down the hallway towards their rooms. We'll be busy all day, all of us. Can't wait to get some red bean taiyaki. Heck, I can go for some right now, Setsuna chirped, and the blonde Texan girl looked back at the boy from Queens and smiled. I can go for some vanilla myself. Pony sighed. Then the morning bell sounded, and Setsuna clicked her tongue. Welp, see ya around, Parker. Vlad-sensei likes us being punctual. We gotta surpass class A after all. She winked. Pony gave her a glare before softening on Peter. I'll see you around, Pony. I'll treat for the taiyaki if we get around to it. He waved, and the girl beamed, trotting back to class with a skip in her step. Peter had a soft smile, taking a deep breath, and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him as he looked at the class A door. Welp, time to get on with the day. Nothing. No light, no screams, not even a wind. But there was a hand. It reached forward. The skinny hand turned. Massive, golden, with jewels on its knuckles. Thumb and finger came together and snap. Peter jerked up with a gasp. His hand snapped out in reflex, grabbing at the hand, trying to. Holy crap, that was fast. And hard too. Oh, Peter blinked away the black spots and looked around, taking deep breaths. A few of his classmates were looking back at him, or more specifically, his hand, which was wrapped around Izuru's hand in a vice-like grip. Peter slinked his hand back, letting the red-haired boy shake it out. Sorry about that. Spooked me. You okay? Hey, don't sweat it. I was seeing if you were really out like a light. Izuru rubbed his wrist a little. Man, math really took it out of you. Math. Oh, right, math class. Boring, very boring. From the look everyone was giving him, he missed the entire thing, and since everyone was here. Did I sleep through lunch? Yes, Takoyami muttered from the side, arms crossed. Peter sighed. Damn it, he missed his chance to work on Karen. Well, he'd find a way. Text Hatsum that he was late. Wait, he didn't have her number. Crap baskets. Parker-san, I have a spare bento if you're hungry, Momo said behind him as he looked back, her face softening with worry. Thanks, but I've got my own. Peter grumbled, rubbing his eyes. Still though, I hadn't pegged you for a sleeper, Sato said, the ever-quiet Koda nodding next to him. Indeed, such actions wouldn't be deplorable, but as you are the deputy representative, I must stress that these actions are inexcusable. Tenya declared with moving arms. Sorry, had trouble sleeping. Peter couldn't argue with that. He was the deputy, he probably had to keep up appearances and such. The door opened up and Mr. Aizawa slunk in. Settle down, it's time for class. Yes sir, Tenya shouted, all but jumping back into his seat. The sleepy teacher sighed at the enthusiasm and cleared his throat. Alright, today's training is going to be a little different. You're going to be having 3 instructors. Myself, All Might, and another hero will be keeping tabs on you. A wave of surprise swept through the class. 3 heroes for their class. Seemed a bit overkill to Peter, but there was that break-in. Sir, Zero says, raising a hand, what kind of training are we doing today? Yeah, that was the big question, wasn't it? Aizawa took out a card from his pocket and displayed it to the class. Rescue, natural disasters, shipwrecks, and stuff like that. Rescue. Excited murmurs filled the class, but Peter couldn't join them. He was still groggy, drained. Guys, settle down. I'm not finished, Aizawa muttered, annoyance lacing every word. He barely raised his voice, but immediately the talking stopped. What you wear in this exercise is up to you. Anything you can bring to the table is allowed. His gaze paused on Peter for a second before looking at Bakugou. I know you like your costumes, but keep in mind you haven't gotten used to them yet and they might hamper your growth. In the end though, it's up to you on that front. At that, everyone glanced at Peter, they weren't even subtle about it. Aizawa rolled his eyes, pulling out a remote and causing the numbed storage vaults to come out, the 19 box filled. He blinked. Did Power Loader finish that scan he was talking about? He can see his own box, labeled 19, come out and have his suit in the Iron Spider module. He must have put the suit back together in time for him. The facility is off campus, so meet out front for the bus dressed up. We leave in 15 minutes, dismissed. Small miracles, Peter loved them. With there being a ride to the facility, Peter had plenty of time to chow down on his pre-made lunch. Aizawa gave him a tired look but didn't say anything about it. Peter saw one look at the inside of the bus and just climbed aboard, much to Tenya's dismay. The guy had a whistle and a seating chart planned already. What did the guy do in his spare time? With everyone piling in, at the front of the bus were himself, Denki, Mina, and Tenya on one of the larger couches while Aoyama, Asui, Izuku, and Ijiro took the other seat. Everyone else piled into the booths leading into the back. Bakugou glared at Peter as he came in, scoffing at the American's lunch as he went by. Todoroki on the other hand didn't even look his way. Eventually, everyone got in, and the bus was underway. Being the last one in, the Tenya slumped in his seat next to Peter and Mina. The bus's open layout ruined my boarding strategy, he sulked. Ida, you really need to loosen up, Mina said, giving him a pat on the back. Well, if we're pointing out the obvious, I've got something to say, Asui said, only to look at Izuku, about you Midoriya. The green-haired boy shared his surprise, eyes shooting open and scooting back a little. Me? What do you mean Asui? Paul Mitsu, Asui deadpanned, causing the boy to deflate. Your quirk, it's a little like All Might's. What? Really? You think so, huh? Izuku said, turning away nervously. I guess I never thought about it. I guess it's similar. Wait a second. Ijiro jumped in. You're forgetting All Might doesn't hurt himself, Asui. Izuku sighed in relief. Peter had his eyes half-lidded as he looked at the passing forestry outside. Still, Ijiro continued, I bet it's cool to have flashy quirk. You could do some pretty cool stuff with it. Mine is pretty strong, but it's got nothing on guys like you and Parker. Peter just put away his lunch when he heard that. What do you mean? Dude, with those moves and that costume you've got flash to spare. Ijiro declared. My naval laser is the flashiest quirk here, I do say. Aoyama beamed, chin resting on his hands. But it doesn't do too good when it hurts your stomach, sweetie. Mina cheekily added. The flashy blonde flinched. Well, if anyone here's got the loudest quirks, all we got to look at Todoroki and Bakugou. Ijiro pointed at the two mentioned in boys in the back rows. A few seats down, Bakugou simmered, glaring out the window while Todoroki was looking out the window, not paying attention to the conversation. True, but Todoroki is too stoic, Asui said. And besides, Bakugou is always too angry, so I don't think he'll ever be popular. Bakugou's eyes went white and he all but jumped out of his seat. What did you say? I'll kick your ass. Asui, having more guts than Peter thought, she would have just pointed at the boy. You see. Peter opened his eyes now. Man, he was loud. You know, we basically just met you, so it's kind of telling that we all know your personality is basically a flaming pile of shit. Denki teased with a smirk. Bakugou turned on him, his face a mask of rage. Peter scowled. He really wasn't in the mood for this. God, he was so loud. His head was hurting. Faking. You're going to regret the day that you applied to this school, asshole. Just shut up, Peter sniped harshly under his breath, and everyone went quiet. So much for under his breath. He heard stomping and Peter looked up, seeing a furious Bakugou look down at him, teeth bared. Back off, Peter muttered, gritting his teeth in a scowl. God, he was so damn tired. He didn't want to deal with this, much less with him. Bakugou, Parker, enough. Aizawa growled, eyes set squarely on the two, his arms crossed. The American did just that, looking away from Bakugou. TCH. Bakugou stomped back to his seat. Loser, he muttered under his breath. Peter glared back under his eyes. You don't deserve to be here, you thug. Peter thought darkly before looking back out to enjoy the scenery and close his eyes. Heh, geez. Man of few words, aren't you, ace? Izaru commented. Great, he had an audience. Just tired. Sorry for being cranky and causing trouble, Peter uttered, rubbing his eyes again. I can tell. You look like you haven't slept a wink. Izaru mused. Look alive, people, we're here, Aizawa stated. The bus pulled up to a massive dome which looked to be larger than any sports stadium he's seen. Maybe Jerry World in Dallas was as big. No, this was far bigger. The dome's exterior was impressive enough, but it was nothing compared to the inside. As the students filed into the stadium behind their teacher, they saw it for themselves. The interior was divided into 6 different sections, each one unique. A giant dome with fire artwork, a similar-looking one with raindrops, a massive pool with a boat and slide, another being a hill emulating a landslide, a mountainous section to round it off. Peter was taking in everything, but had a hard time listening as the astronaut-looking Pro Hero 13 began to drag on and on. It was getting harder to pay attention. He just wants to sleep. So bad. You sure you want to take part in this assignment, Parker-san? Peter turned his head, and Momo was there, looking worried. You've been looking exhausted all day now. Could you talk to Aizawa-sensei perhaps to talk over things? Oh, I'll be fine, Yaoyorozu-san. Peter rubbed his eyes. Don't worry about me one bit. But you don't look like you're at 100%. I am. I got some sleep, okay? I did. For an hour. Or 2 hours. Peter sighed, hand over his face as he realized he didn't have the iron spider mask on. Feeling the metal slink over him woke him up a little. Sorry, snapped again. It's alright, I'm just worried about you. I am Class 1A's rep, and you're my deputy. It comes with the position. I know. Peter rubbed his eyes. I'll get a full day's sleep when I get home today. He sighed, opening them again as he heard 13 mention something about a USJ. Isn't that Universal Studios Japan? It's unforeseen simulation joint. Momo elaborated as Peter stood up straight. Focus. Now 13 was talking to Aizawa for some reason. Why were they whispering to each other? So I guess we're gonna be doing rescue work here. Seems so. Let's partner up again. Momo smiled lightly. You did a lot in carrying the weight back in the battle trials. It's only fair I return the favor. This again. Peter smiled back. I told you, we got equal credit. Still, he focused back on the teachers as 13 began to talk again. Okay, first I need to go over some points. 1, 2, maybe 4, 5. The entire class seemed to roll their eyes before the astronaut-looking hero held out her hand, starting with her first point. As some of you know, my quirk is called Black Hole, and it can suck in anything and turn it into dust. Peter gasped sharply, feeling his heart seize up. Parker-san, Momo asked. He was breathing too hard. She would notice. I'm fine. Peter shook his head. He can feel some students turn their heads his way. He heard 13 mention how their quirks could be so dangerous if handled incorrectly. I'm fine. You don't sound fine, and you didn't look fine on the bus. You looked ready to pass out, and you sound like it too, Momo sternly commended, and she put her hand on his shoulder. When Aizawa-sensei is done with 13-sensei, we're going to talk to them. You're not acting yourself, and you may get hurt during an exercise. I'm alright, Peter said under his breath. I'll be. He paused, looking down at the floor, sighing and deflating like a balloon. Just let me get through the day. Is there something you'd like to share, Parker? 13 asked, cutting through, and Peter perked up. Now everyone's eyes were on him, and he gripped his fists. Bakugou seemed to scoff in amusement, while Aizawa just flatly stared at him. Momo looked worried. He noticed All Might wasn't there. Wasn't he supposed to be here, as Mr. Aizawa said? Odd. And nothing. I'm alright. Sorry for interrupting, Peter muttered, looking down and bowing lightly. Momo sighed. Just not, having a good day. It'll get better from here, he whispered, as 13 elaborated how the class would be doing exercises to open new perspective on saving others. He patted his cheeks. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to sound so rude. It's alright, she said softly. You don't seem like the kind of person to stay up all night all the time, so I'm sure you had a good reason for having a hard time sleeping. But you and I are class reps now. We have a standard to uphold, and we need to be at our best to support each other. I know. He wished he didn't have to stay up, but it was the only way to stave them off. He gripped his arm tightly and heard the sound of applause, with 13 bowing. Ah, she must have finished going through her points. He'd need to get a refresher from Izukumidoriya. Alright then class. The tingly feeling racing down his spine. First off, the lights went out in the dome. Peter perked up, his fatigue vanishing as a cold thrill ran through his entire body. Goosebumps. He had felt this once before, when the space donut appeared over New York. Aizawa paused, and turned around as Peter rushed to his side to get a look. Down in the central plaza of the USJ by the fountain was a black vortex, spinning and growing. A hand appeared and from it, gripping the portal, unkempt shaggy teal hair, the face covered by what looked like a severed human hand, and a single, blood-red eye. Two golden lights appeared from the black-purple mass above the figure as they stepped out. More and more of them, all vaguely human, but no two alike. Some clutched weapons, some were weapons. Stick together now and don't move. Aizawa barked. 13. Protect the students. What is that? Izukumidoriya asked in confusion. I thought this was a rescue exercise. Peter didn't need to know. The look in that man's eye, clearly visible through his mask, was proof enough. These guys, or villains. Parker, get back with the students now, Aizawa yelled, putting on his yellow goggles. This is real, those are villains. Besides the hands man, a massive black-beaked titan walked out beside him. He wore nothing but cargo pants, and his brain was exposed. But Mr. Aizawa, get back there now. You're exhausted. Follow my orders, now. Aizawa barked in English. Peter nodded, backing away. The rest of the class stared in stunned disbelief. Villains? That can't be. What villains would be dumb enough to sneak into UA? Sensei. Momo turned towards Aizawa and 13. Why aren't the intruder sensors going off? They are. The systems aren't lying. They're all green. 13 confirmed, looking at her watch. Which means, someone's jamming the signal. Todoroki stepped up, looking down at the mob of thugs down by the central plaza. A quirk, or some kind of device. We're far from the main campus. There's only 2 adults here, so they came in here with a plan. Peter added. They had to. Bit over the top for us, isn't it? Izukumidoriya asked. Be that as it may, Momo said, this too coordinated to be an ordinary sneak attack. She's right, something's up. Izuku murmured. Whatever it was, Aizawa didn't care. He stepped forward, only stopping to turn to his fellow teacher. 13. Evacuate the students now, and try calling the school outside the facility, he said, his hands moving to scarf. One of these villains has to be using some kind of signal jamming quirk. Kaminari. Denki perked up. Try using your quirk to either throw it off or call for help. I'm counting on you. Alright. The blonde electric user stammered, nervous. But sensei, you can't fight them alone. Izuku yelled out. He was right. There were too many of them. His quirk could only work if he kept his eyes open, and that's way too many for just him. He looked down, seeing the mob march towards them. They were heading closer to the stairs. He looked at Aizawa, who was focusing solely on the villain mob. No hero is one-trick pony, he muttered, and he flung his scarf out. Peter felt nostalgic as the shaggy-haired man leapt into the melee. Wow, he was amazing. None of them could even get close, and any that did got punched or kicked into next week or got caught in his scarf. But already they were surrounding him. Dozens, maybe over 50, 60. Peter gripped his fists and felt Momo's hand on his shoulder. Peter-san, we have to go now. But Aizawa-sensei can handle himself. Momo said, we need to go, Midoriya. The green-haired boy snapped out of his stupor, almost just noticing that he was still there. He nodded his agreement and Peter couldn't argue with her. He was a pro, and he could handle himself long enough until help arrived. Okay, let's go, Peter said, taking off, the sounds of battle fading behind him. Unfortunately for everyone there, even the entrance to the USJ was long. It was 200 meters to the door. Peter managed to get to the main group before he felt his hairs stand on end. Something's coming, he warned. Todoroki cast him a questioning glance, only to stop as another black portal appeared in front of them. 13 stopped dead, eyes wide as the black miasma spewed out of the ground. It grew and spread with twin glowing golden eyes staring down at them. Peter jumped forward, his spider legs at the ready. Next to him, Todoroki clenched his fist, ice spreading across his arm while the rest of the class also dropped into whatever stances they could manage. There is no escape, the mass spoke, a deep rumbling sound that sent a shiver down Peter's spine. But where are my manners? Allow me to introduce ourselves. We are the League of Villains. My apologies for inviting ourselves to your little gathering unannounced. Geez, and people say that Peter liked to talk. Fine by him. His HUD was already alight with scanners looking over this guy. Everything that could be seen was gas, but wait a second, there was something else. You see, we just had to say hello, and see this famed training ground of justice for ourselves. A fitting place for All Might to take his last breath, wouldn't you agree? Peter's eyes narrowed, so that's what they were here for, a chance at the #1 hero. He remembered Aizawa saying that All Might was supposed to be here. A flash, and his HUD centered its pieces around something in the black mass. A set of metal plates connected to the gas, hidden from normal sight by a thick layer of whatever he was made of. Though I must say that I find myself deeply disappointed, the black mass mused. The schedule said that he was supposed to be here, but there's no sign of him. It huffed, spreading out its thick essence like tentacles towards them. Ah, well, it matters not, I still have a role to play. Next to him, Peter heard a click. 13 raised his hand, only to stop when Bakugou and Izaru jumped forwards like madmen. Battle cries split the air right before an explosion tore at the space around the black mass. Peter held up a hand to shield himself from the dust, barely catching the outlines of the two boys. "Did you think we were just gonna stand around and let you tear up the place?" Izaru asked, his voice filled with a confidence that Peter wished he shared. But as the smoke cleared, even that faded away. The black mass was fine, save for a clear view on the metal brace on his neck. There, it's gotta be the weak point. He wiped his hand forward, shooting a line of webbing that hit the solid bracer. A grunt of frustration echoed out of the mass. It seemed to pull away, but Peter wasn't going to let go. Izaru, Bakugou, go for the bracer, Peter shouted. In the center, the two looked shocked, but both of them grinned. "Nice eyes, Ace," Izaru shouted. "Out of the way, meathead." Bakugou screamed. "Both of you, get out of the way," 13 ordered. The two paused in their charge, stopped to glance back at the astronaut hero. Peter grunted out of frustration at 13. They had it under control. As expected of your school, the mass complimented. And then the living miasma exploded, spreading the mass and covering everyone. He heard a scream and saw Momo standing close to Zaru. "Momo-san," Peter yelled, jumping at them as the black miasma surged forth. "I believe it would be best to let you meet my comrades and your demise." Now, black filled his vision, and Peter felt a tingling sensation rush down his spine, ordering him to run. No, he had to get to Momo and Zaru. They were closest. He got to them both, embracing them and hearing surprised gasps from the two girls. He saw nothing but darkness, but he felt the girls. They weren't dead. "Parker, Peter-san, begone." Peter felt the webbing go slack, and the next thing he knew, he was somewhere else. First thing that came to him was the fact he wasn't alone. Next to him, Momo blinked in confusion and Zaru was the same way as they were on their knees. They were in a rocky expanse, specially made for some sort of mountain simulation. "What the hell?" Zaru asked, looking around. "You guys okay?" Peter asked, his mask sliding off. "I'm fine," Momo admitted, but she looked nervous. "You didn't have to rescue us, but I appreciate the sentiment." "Thank you." "Then better," Zaru said. "Where are we?" "Looks like the mountain zone," Momo mused. He scanned the boulders, only to freeze as someone started to move. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, and soon a ring of villains started crawling out of the woodwork. Peter's mask slid back into place, and on instinct he moved back to back with his companions. Almost all of the villains laughed maliciously as they approached, relishing the slaughter to come. Even the ones without weapons were scary in their own right, wrapped in mummy wrappings or looking like something out of Friday the 13th. A particularly big guy advanced on Peter, cracking his knuckles. Some of them licked their chops. Peter dropped low, ready to attack the second this guy got close. Momo pulled a shield out one arm, and a sword out of the other. She handed the sword to a grateful Zaru Kyoka before making another. "How many are there?" Momo asked. Peter looked around, his HUD marking everyone in a short haze of red. "My visor says 37. Zaru grimaced. "This isn't going to be good." "Stay close, we'll make it through this," Momo promised, but Peter caught the fear in her eyes, and in Zaru's. "He'll protect them both." He willed his spider legs to spring out. "Here they come." At that, the villains charged. Peter flung himself into the fray, unleashing his webs to pin the first foe. Trapped, they could not evade his lariat, his legs striking their necks and knocking them to the ground. He leapt up, firing off yet more webbing at the throng of thugs charging towards him. "Die!" shrieked an obese woman, a cleaver held high over her head as she bore down upon him. Peter sidestepped, moving like water as the cleaver slashed through empty air, then kicked her in the face. The woman fell, crashing straight into the throng of villains behind her, toppling them like ninepins. A tingle down his spine. "Parker, move." It was Zaru. Peter jumped to the side, a loud bass sound pushing away the loose stones before the invisible force of earphone jack slammed into the mob. They clutched their ears, howling in agony. "Thanks for the heads up," he yelled, ducking a pipe and driving his fist into an unsuspecting hooligan's face. He jumped and spun, his leg catching a bandana-covered villain and hurling him away. Another thug came on, this one with a giant boulder, a boulder that was actually his hand, held high overhead. Oh boy. Peter dodged the downward swing and let loose with both webbers, wrapping his opponent in thick white silk, binding him fast. He yanked his arms, and the villain tottered and fell towards him. Time to rock your world. He spun like a dancer and kicked, his foot catching the trapped villain and sending him flying. Parker landed, and could have sworn he could hear teeth popping as his target crashed into yet more of his fellows. He glanced about, trying to follow the battle, to make sense of the furious melee. There was Momo with her paintball gun, downing thugs with well-aimed shots, some in the face, some in the hands, best of all in the legs, the paint trapping them much as his webbing did. Zaru was at her back, the punk girl firing shockwaves at anyone who drew to close. Short range and long range, fighting back to back, a fine time working on the fly. Zaru, take this. Momo handed her the paintball gun. Just toss it when you're out. Appreciate it. Zaru grinned as she took aim, and the villains scattered to avoid her sights. Let's make some noise. She clicked her ear jacks to her boots, unleashing another shockwave to immobilize her targets. Momo flung out some iron spike tacks, and then a capture net. The net caught a group of hooligans as they tried to outflank her, slowing them long enough for Peter to add his web bullets, putting them out of the fight. Whoa, cool Momo-san. Seriously, you can make anything. Peter called out with a thumbs up. He sidestepped, a dagger whistling through empty air, then drove a quick spider leg into the owner's kidney. I can pin all these villains down, Peter-san. I need a higher vantage point. Momo called out, if you can send me to that higher ledge. She swung her staff, knocking away a pipe, and tripping the skull-faced thug right into a vat of white goo behind her calf. I can handle this. Oh, got a plan. Yes, Zaru-san. If you can stun them long enough in front of us, the plan can work. Whatever you say, class rep. Any plan is a good one. Zaru avoided a snake-faced villain. Duh, he almost bit me. I'll do a lot more than thaw gah. He was silenced as Peter landed on him, knocking him flat. Okay, so, Zaru stuns. He whipped around, firing some webbing at their feet. You do the thingy, and what do I do? Momo smirked. Just get me up there, then pick off any we don't get. You're going down, bug boy, yelled the hockey mask villain. How are these brats so strong? They're only kids. Just rush 'em. Peter smiled back and shot her a thumbs up. Leave it to me. He grabbed Momo in his arms and leapt up, carrying her like a bride on her wedding day. With a mighty leap, Peter reached the higher outcropping and set her gently down. Okay, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. He turned towards the mob and flung himself into the melee. Hey buddy, I'm not a bug. I'm an arachnid. He loosed 2 lines of webbing, then curled up with his spider legs and pulled himself towards them, crashing into them like a bowling ball. Strike! Peter whooped, leaping to his feet and blinding them with webbing. Gah, can't see. The fuck is this white shit? Is this guy a pro? Peter landed and lashed out at his enemies. His spine continued to tingle. Parker, keep them busy a little more. Peter fired some webbing, pulling himself out of the way for another sound wave. Those enemies not already unconscious reeled in agony, clutching their ears. Some, the strongest, forced themselves to go on, approaching Zaru and Momo. But Momo had fashioned herself a baseball gun, and was tormenting her attackers with balls of white goo. Oh geez, she griped as she saw the tattered state of her skimpy red skirt. Peter ducked his massive fist and dodged a swinging club. He hopped over a low kick, the attacker's bladed spurs hissing through the air. He lashed out with fist and foot, knocking his enemies flying. He saw her hand glow with the rainbow as she put her hand on top of the glass tube. Baseball-sized pellets going down the hatch. She flipped the switch. Peter jumped out of the way. A barrage of web-filled paintballs erupted onto the villain horde. They yelped and howled as white goo splattered all over them, some of them even sticking together. Some tried to make for cover behind boulders or their fallen comrades, but it didn't do much good. Zaru, give them an earful. Momo called out. Leave it. Zaru gritted her teeth, a bead of sweat running down her brow. To me. She unleashed another sound blast, louder and more terrible than any before. Peter had to clasp his hands to his ears, wincing at the pain of its passage. All that heard it fell over in ear-rending agony, rendered helpless by the sound. All but a few, who forced themselves onward. Peter waved his hand, and the punk girl noticed, ending the onslaught. Peter fired 2 web lines, throwing himself onto the handful who remained. With kicks and blows he downed them, weakened and drained as they were, until only one remained. There we go. He dropped the bad guy like a sack of potatoes, hands on his hips as the villain writhed and squirmed. You ain't going nowhere. Gala. Fuck you, you damn brat, snarled the thug. Peter could hear the last remaining villain stagger upward, and he looked back. He flung a web line and caught the thug before he could retreat, bringing the rat-faced bad guy down with a crash. But the villain's feet caught his eye, more like the talons of a bird than a human's legs. Peter webbed them tight as Momo and Zaru approached. "Okay, baddie, how did this happen?" Peter asked, arms crossed. "NJJJJHN. I ain't telling you nothing." The rat villain cursed, spitting up at Peter. Thankfully his mask was on and he rolled his eyes. "You can take out my fingernails, pluck my whiskers or send me back to the slammer. I ain't saying squat." "Huh, funny, considering his mutation quirk," commented Zaru, hands rubbing her ear jacks. Momo appeared beside her, her red top in tatters. You gonna change clothes or what? You're barely modest right now," added Zaru hastily, her cheeks pink. "I can just make some patches or make a new top." "It's fine," replied Momo, smiling as her arm glowed, her ravaged top remaking itself under the touch of her quirk. "So, he's not going to talk?" "Guess not." "But," Momo brought her hand out, the rainbow lights flittering, and in it was a pair of metal pliers with a ring inside. Peter cocked his head, trying to work out what it was for, and then saw Jiru's jaw hit the floor. "I suppose there are other ways." Ratface was as pale as a sheet as she advanced on him. Whoa, time out. Spider guy, you gotta help another brother here. Your teammate is insane, man." "Insane? What are you talking about?" Momo simply clenched the pliers, and some metal blade appeared through the ring and, oh dear. Momo-san, isn't this going a wee bit too far?" He then turned towards Ratface, or whatever his name was. "You better start talking, man, for your own good." Note to self, never make Momo-san mad. "I never knew you had it in you," Zaru muttered with widened eyes. Momo bit her lip, blushing, stepping to avoid the rat's vision as she glared at Peter and nudged at the cow tool. "Oh, so that's it." Peter looked back down at the shivering rat. "Yeah, man, better start singing if I were you. Otherwise," Peter held out his index finger, then with his other hand, made a scissor motion and an audible snip on the outstretched finger. Ratface screamed like a little girl as his thighs clenched together. Okay, fine, just don't do that to me. Please, will you tell us anything?" Zaru asked, her earphone jacks coiling like snakes as she glared down at him, arms crossed. She must have caught it. "Everything. Just please, not that. You want my name, social security, where I buried a couple $1,000 for a rainy day. You can have it." Momo paused, blinking. "Just want to know how you got in here." "Oh, that's it. Well, we were just a small gang. Just crash some ATMs and steal some purses, just to get by from our shitty lives. Well, most of us were till the hands guy said, 'Hey, wanna kill the symbol of peace and some dumb hero kids? Partner with us.' Well, I'm just paraphrasing here." The rat shook his head. "We just wanted to get rid of that stupid paragon you kids put on a pedestal and—" Momo clenched the tool, it making an audible snip sound, and his growing bravado wilted like a flower before a blizzard. "Please don't use that thing on me, please, he sobbed, his aggression turning to despair as he blubbered out and wept. Gosh, this was fitting, considering his quirk. But Peter couldn't blame him. "So all these guys were recruited by Hands Guy," Peter murmured. "And if I had to guess, the Black Mist dude warped them all here for you all to hide." "Kurajiri." "Yeah, that's his name. How did you know that?" "Kurajiri. Oh, Black Mist. That's the warp guy's name." "What about Hands Guy?" "I don't know his name. He said, 'Follow me and I can kill All Might.' We were friggin' homeless, man. We had nowhere to go and—" He paused, and for good reason, as both Peter, Momo, and Zaru turned towards the flood zone. The giant light show of electric sparks cascaded around the massive pool. "That must be Kaminari," Zaru yelled. "We don't know that. Could be a villain with a quirk that's similar." Momo cut in as she looked out beyond it. "But it wouldn't hurt to investigate. Let me see." Peter zoomed in with his mask, looking around the water, and found a lot of bodies rising to the surface, eyes rolled over in gargling foam. And there by the boat was a floating Kaminari Denki, looking stupid and thrusting his thumbs out. The villains were twitching and spasming, so he could not have killed them. Well, maybe. He looked over to the boat, and there was Izuku and Nasui. They were safe. "We're good, that's Kaminari. Midoriya and Nasui are with him." Zaru sighed in relief. "Alright, least we know some of us are okay. Guess him going full stupid has its benefits." The purple-haired girl looked to the side. "Unlike last time. Still, Parker, your costume is the best. Like seriously, how did you get that design before you even got to UA? It's a long story. I'll tell you about it when we get out of this alive. Maybe we can talk over taiyaki and ice cream. Me and a friend or two are going already, so I appreciate the socializing, Peter-san, Zaru-san, but we have more pressing matters to attend to." Momo cut in, and both teens perked up. "The fact they sent him to a zone filled with water means you guys had no clue of our quirks then, don't you agree?" It made sense. Denki was a toaster, and he got tossed into a literal bathtub which had to be filled with villains with aquatic quirks. Hopefully his group hadn't been frazzled too badly. We just came in here to kill the symbol of peace and, well, scare you guys. Well, at least me. I know some of these guys were straight up killers, but not me. I just wanted to see All Might die up close. Peter sighed. We're wasting time. If Kaminari and his group is finished up, we should go down to the central plaza and back up Aizawa-sensei. He won't hold out for long. He's right. Momo turned towards the rat villain. You've been cooperative with us, and you have our thanks. When the heroes come, I'll put in a good word for you. Hopefully you won't be punished too harshly because of it. Momo turned to leave, then noticed the bridge was down. Darn, we're trapped up here. I can get us both across. Peter gestured. But I'll have to carry you both. The black-haired beauty turned, blushing lightly. Really? Well, one of you will have to go on my back. The other I'll have to carry with one hand. Peter turned towards Ratface. Hey, thanks for the info. The webbing will dissolve in an hour or so. But hey, pros will be here by then. So, I guess chill and relax. On a rock face. Yeah, thanks buddy. Ratface Kanarilag rolled his eyes and sighed, looking up and resigning himself to his fate. You weren't really gonna do it, weren't you? Peter asked in a whisper, unable to contain himself. Momo blanched. Heavens no. My gesture to you made it obvious. Okay, just double checking. Peter decided not to press the matter further. Now, we should get going to the central plaza. He bent down. First come first serve. Momo was the first, wrapping her arms around his neck, and he felt her large breasts squish against his back. Peter took a deep breath. There'd been those times he'd look at Liz and wonder, and she's more slimmer than Momo. But nothing like this. Why was she so big and soft and smart and... Oi, Parker, you zooming in on something again? Jiru asked, waving in front of his face. Oh, sorry. Come in. He wrapped an arm around Momo to support her, trying desperately not to grab her butt, then picked up Jiru bridal style. It was an awkward arrangement, and Parker felt even more awkward when Momo wrapped her legs around his waist. With his free hand, he had Jiru secured, with Momo wrapping his arms around his neck and her bare legs around his waist. He didn't move. Oh lord, if you saw him now. Ew, Parker, you're not moving, said Jiru. Is this okay? I hope it's not any trouble. Nope, Peter yelped. None at all. He couldn't use his webbing, and his spider legs were covered by Momo's. Momo's, leave it to me. He took a running start, Momo tightening her arms and legs, and he leapt over the expanse, clearing it in a single leap. He landed at a run, accelerating into a sprint. We're not too heavy, I hope. Momo asked. None at all. This will get us faster too. Peter called back as he sprinted down the trail. He made mighty leaps, landing across boulders and rocks until he made it to the entrance of the mountain zone. Once on solid ground, he let Jiru down and felt Momo let go. You two okay? I'm alright. Gotta say, that was fast. Jiru looked back up at the mountain zone. Good move, Parker. Don't mention it, hee. Peter rubbed the back of his head as he turned towards Momo, who had a little pink on her cheeks. Okay. He looked into her eyes and saw her gaze meet his before they both looked away. He patted his cheeks. Game face, Peter, game face. Villains are everywhere and Mr. Aizawa is in danger. He turned, running towards the trees, Momo and Jiru in hot pursuit. Peter got to the edge of the central plaza, looking out over the huge open space that was the center of a brawl. A second later, Peter's visor lit up, highlighting everyone he could see. At the pool, he could see Izuku and Asui carrying a dumbfounded Denki standing next to someone. It was the teal-haired handman. He turned and Peter felt his blood freeze, because there, near the edge of the stairway, was Mr. Aizawa, face down next to bloody and broken goggles. That was nothing on the monster standing over him. A towering obsidian mass of muscle and scars that dwarfed Aizawa. It barely needed one hand to hold him down, a finger driving his face into the dirt. Even from the other end of the clearing, Peter heard something snap. Parker, Jiru whispered, why are you just standing there? Her voice faded away, her blood draining from her face as the sight of Aizawa came to her. Oh god. Momo breathed behind him, hands over her mouth in shock. She took the words right out of Peter's mouth. Aizawa was a pro, a professional hero who was supposed to teach them how to be heroes themselves. Now he was face down, in a pool of his own blood. The monstrosity turned, revealing a beak filled with razor-sharp teeth, its bloodshot eyes fixing on Izuku and the others. Peter tensed. He had to do something. They had to act. The others would be dead if they didn't. The second Peter finished the thought, Izuku launched out of the water, his arm glowing with barely restrained power. Get away from him, he roared. Peter felt that tingle on the back of his neck. Quick as he could, he grabbed hold of Jiru and Momo again as his spider legs anchored themselves into the earth. Hold on. he shouted. Whatever they said next was drowned out when Izuku's first struck home, and the clearing erupted with all the power of a tornado. Moments earlier, divide and conquer. Shoto mused, forgive me, but you thugs don't have the quirks to threaten All Might. He stepped forward, his foot cracking against the icy expanse that he had created. It was instinct more than anything that compelled him. One moment he was watching Parker point out a weakness in the fog villain, and the next thing he knew he was stuck in a landslide with a few dozen thugs in front of him. Naturally, he froze them in place before they could so much as think. A bumbling fool he might be, but the American gave Shoto sound experience. Freeze everything before it could be a problem. A few of them stared at him, horror coming through what little sense they had left. What is this kid? They screamed. Kid? He didn't classify. Nevertheless, if anything, it showed just how low level these guys were. According to the fog villain, they came here to kill All Might. At first, Shoto thought that these guys might actually have the power to back up that claim. They went through the trouble of getting them here, so they had to have something. Then all of these guys were caught in his first attack. Low-level cannon fodder trying to overwhelm him and his peers with numbers. A small silver lining, Shoto supposed. If this was indicative of their quality, everyone else should be fine. Then again, there was that obsidian brute next to the leader. Shoto frowned. He was starting to hate unknowns. Hey, he said, causing the closest villain to flinch within his icy prison. If you stay in there any longer, your skin will rot away from frostbite. But luckily for you, I'm trying to be a hero. If you tell me what makes you think you can kill All Might, then I'll let you out. The villain, a lizard-looking heteromorphic, growled as Shoto got closer. Nice try, kid, but no one's going to talk that easily. Wrong answer. Shoto rested his left finger against the villain's forehead and started to turn up the heat. The ice melted away, and the blazing heat touched his skin. Stop, I quote ill talk. Right answer. True to his word, Shoto pulled his finger back, tapping the same spot with his right side, cooling off what little damage was made. It left a pit in his stomach to use such tactics, but he didn't have the luxury of time. Not when everyone else was in danger. Well, what is it? Shoto asked. Hey, don't expect too much, we're only street guys, so don't go. Skip the preamble, Shoto demanded. Plan now. There wasn't one. The villain admitted. Shoto narrowed his eyes and the villain shivered from something other than the cold. It's the truth. That hand kid, Shigaraki, said he had something that could kill All Might, and then that black thing tore up our gang until we agreed to help him. So you really are nothing but cannon fodder, Shoto muttered. So much for information. Hey, I'm right here, you shitty brat. He kept going, screaming something obscene, but Shoto ignored him. It looked as if he was giving them a little too much credit about thinking this through. Overwhelmed the most talented hero prospects in all of Japan through numbers alone. Shoto could commend them for their efforts if the effort wasn't completely wasted. However, the thought didn't bring him any comfort, because if they didn't have much of a plan, but still came here confident that they could take down All Might, that was something to worry about. A loud crack reverberated through the chamber, like a bomb going off. Shoto's head snapped around, and he saw the waters of the artificial lake roiling as if in a tempest, a gust of hot wind passing over him. What the hell was that? Peter could barely keep his eyes open as the hot wind buffeted him. As it stopped, he let out a breath he didn't remember holding in. As the dust cleared, that black thing was in front of Izuku, no worse for wear, arms spread. Peter couldn't believe what he was seeing. Izuku's punch made the Hulks look tame, and this thing didn't even budge. It just stood there, holding Aizawa in one of its massive hands like a ragdoll, staring down at the green-haired boy with those crazed eyes. That was quite the special attack you just pulled off. Lot of force too, Handman said, his voice a dry rasp like something out of a slasher movie. You trying to be All Might, brat? He let out a sickening laugh, shrugging at Izuku's efforts as the black thing clamped down on the boy's arm. Well, whatever, he said. Time to die. He reached towards a stunned Asui. Peter was moving before he knew what he was doing, jumping for all he was worth, spider legs propelling him like a rocket. He jumped, clearing half the plaza, launching a line of webbing straight at Handman. But Handy was quick, and dodged the white silk at the last moment, eyeing Peter from behind his mask. Peter came down, driving his foot into the obsidian titan's chest. But the monster didn't even flinch, and Peter bounced off its bare chest, his leg a mass of pain. He landed on his palm, ignoring the pain in his leg as he flipped and landed on his feet, narrowing his blue eyes at the duo. Oh, and who's this? Mused Handman, regarding him with mild interest. Someone who saw you guys having a party decided to crash it. Peter yelled. He readied his web launchers. He could blind them at least. Nomu, Handy commanded, and the beaked monstrosity, Nomu, moved. It let out a roar and stepped in front of Handy, Peter's two strands splattering over its raised forearm. Seeing her chance, Asui leapt out of the water, a still chuckling Denki over her shoulder. She shot out her tongue, wrapping it around Izuku and pulling him free of Namu's grip. Handy let out a bark and started shaking in what could only be frustration and rage. "Now look at what you did," Handy hissed, glaring his red eyes at Peter. "Rather rude of you, sticking your nose into other people's business." "That's the thing with party crashers, we come in unannounced," retorted Peter. Gritting his teeth, he pulled. And the Nomu thing didn't even budge. Oh come on. Even Captain America had to pull back when he threw down with Peter. "What was with this thing?" "Parker-san," Momo called. Peter glanced as the two ladies rushed up behind him. Handman groaned, scratching his neck. "Oh joy, more kids," he griped. "Parker-san, cut your webbing," Izuku shouted, clutching his finger. He stood in front of Asui and Denki, looking like he was holding back a grimace. "In the middle of something, Midoriya," Peter grunted, putting his back into the pull. Still nothing. "Holy crap, this thing just wouldn't move." Peter gritted his teeth. "Please, just give him something." "No, you don't understand," Izuku screamed. "This thing, they made it to kill All Might." Peter's mind went blank. How could this be true? He knew they had come to kill All Might as part of some sick plan, but a part of him just couldn't accept it. He was All Might, the symbol of peace, the best hero in the world. Peter's head turned slowly to the monster in front of him. It smiled with a mouth full of daggers, its eyes crazed and inhuman, its form a monolith of muscle and scars, in its fist his unconscious teacher. And it had taken Izuku's blow, his skyscraper robot busting punch, without so much as flinching. A sick laugh nearly made him jump out of his skin. The handed villain's eyes curved up, revealing him smiling a sick ear-to-ear grin. "Oh yes, you see, this Nomu here was specially made to kill the symbol of peace. His quirk, shock absorption, can take anything the great #1 hero could dish out, and just as strong, with raw physical power to match. A big old punching bag that hits you back, with speed to boot." He cackled some more. Peter felt his hair stand on end, and a voice in the back of his head screamed, "Run!" The great mass looked almost confused as it played with the webbing in its hand, dropping Aizawa like a piece of trash. It didn't even look down when the teacher landed on his bad arm. "Parker-san," Momo whispered behind him, "we need to escape." "I'm open to ideas," Peter hissed back. Momo grimaced as she looked around. "We have numbers. We need to use that to get in and get Aizawa-sensei out of here." "All for it, Rep," Jiru murmured loudly. "But did you miss the part where Crazy over there said the big guy was supposed to take down All Might? What can we do?" Momo nodded, and the worry on her face tripled as she looked to Peter. The American blinked and grimaced. "Oh," he said, at a loss. "I know, but you're the only one here that has a chance," she said, her breath hitching as Handman started to move forward, his eyes blood red. "You're the most agile out of all of us besides Asui, and with your suit you can do something with your webs. Just..." She stopped, a bead of sweat running down her face as Hands wiggled his fingers. "Give us as much time as you can." Peter gulped, but he nodded. Dreaded as he might, he was their best bet. He clenched his fist, trying in vain to stop his hands from shaking. "Whatever it takes," he agreed. "Jiru," Momo continued, her skin alight with her quirk, "keep the other one away with your sound." "Got it," the punk girl said, ear jacks plugging in. She swallowed something and gave Peter a worried look. "Good luck, Peter," she said in English. "You too," Peter breathed back in his native tongue. He lowered his stance and glared. Nomu stood in front of him, ready and waiting and not having moved an inch forward. Jiru said something that made Midoriya and Asui get into fighting stances of their own, but Peter couldn't let himself hear it. He could do this, he could do this. It hadn't said a thing beyond giving a soft grunt, and that growl of challenge when Handy was threatened. Moreover, it didn't even move until Handy said something. Did that mean it was nothing but a crazed attack dog? Peter didn't know if that made him feel better or worse. He shook his head and swallowed his fear. It didn't matter what he thought, he had to do this. He tensed, and his hair stood on end. "Nomu," Handy narrowed his eyes and pointed with his finger. "Sick 'em." The beast perked up and took a step towards him. Then it charged, a bullet train of muscle heading right towards Peter. The American tensed, waiting for the chance to get out of the way. He saw Izuku and Asui get Aizawa, trying to lift him to get him out of the battlefield. "Good, get him out of there and..." "Hold on. Nomu, get them," Handy ordered, pointing at them. Peter's heart clenched up as the beast paused, and its head whipped towards the two kids by the pool. Against all laws of reason, Nomu somehow switched direction, sprinting towards Izuku and Asui. "No you don't," Peter shouted, firing his webbing from both wrists, sticking the fluid onto Nomu's ankles and tugging as hard as he could. The massive beast lurched and stumbled, struggling to move towards its designated targets as Peter pulled and strained, struggling to hold the thing back. The spider legs carved trenches into the ground, scraping and scratching at the plaza pavement as he dug them in harder. It was like trying to pull back a runaway train. Sui and Izuku, to their credit, didn't freeze in panic. Though he could see the fear on their faces, they held tight to Aizawa and moved fast to get out of danger. A shiver ran down Peter's spine, his senses warning him a split second before it happened. Maybe if he'd been more attentive, maybe if he hadn't lost sleep, the outcome would have changed. He would have reacted faster. Nomu moved, as though suddenly realizing what was wrong. It grabbed onto the webbing, ripping the two strands in a single, massive fist and pulling hard. Peter's own strength amplified through the suit, and the dug-in spider legs gave a second of resistance before Naomu's strength ripped him clear off the ground, tearing the arachnid appendages out of the asphalt like the roots off a tree, sending Peter flying headlong towards the obsidian monster. He curled himself into a ball, spider legs coiling in front of him to form a protective shell, blocking out his vision as he saw Nomu chamber its massive black fist. The blow that landed shattered the spider legs like fine metal glass, then slammed into Peter. Spider web cracks spread over the surface of his suit, nanobots glimmering like particles of dust as they tumbled away. Peter felt the wind rush from his chest, his head crashing back against his spine, and then forward again as the blow hurled him back, away. His limbs went limp, his mind a blank, as he bounced away like a ragdoll. Only by instinct, by some flicker of muscle memory, did he manage to control the tumble and steady himself. "Parker, Peter-san," he heard Momo yelp. Peter breathed hard, sucking down greedy lungfuls of air as he saw the nanomachines flow over the broken armor like liquid mercury. Mr. Stark's tech desperately trying to repair itself. "Nomu, get those two brats with Eraserhead now." The voice was like a jumpstart to Peter's foggy brain, and he remembered his classmates, Aizawa, the danger they were in. All at once, before he could think, before he could grasp the pain he should be in, he leapt to his feet. His arms came up, firing lines of webbing at the obsidian monstrosity, catching the beast at the nape of its neck and yanking as hard as he could. The monster let out a screech of surprise, stumbling as it lost balance, taken by surprise. Peter let go as it clawed at the webbing, lest it pull him again. He released a breath, one he hadn't realized he had been holding, and then the beast was on top of him. In the blink of an eye it had moved 20 feet. It was all Peter could do to raise his arms in a cross guard before Naomu's foot, nearly the size of his torso, smashed into his chest. He coughed, feeling metal at the back of his throat. Warning symbols flashed across his HUD as the kick flung him back, telling of systems damage and injuries. He hit the ground in a backwards roll, reaching his feet in a motion that looked smoother than he felt, stumbling at the last step before his spider senses warned him again. He tried to move. Too slow. He saw the monster's massive, open palm grab onto him, a single fist nearly wrapping all the way around his torso before its twin wrapped around the other side. The pressure was immense, and Peter struggled and writhed, trying to pry open its tight grip. He tried to summon the spider legs, the suit's warnings flashing red. Nomu held him up, and Peter felt his legs dangling off the ground. He thrust out his hands, firing two web lines at the ground behind Nomu, pulling. For all his effort, the monster stepped back, stumbling off balance for a moment before it caught itself. He felt the grip get tighter. Peter tried to suck down a breath. It was hard, and getting harder. The pressure on his ribs was becoming unbearable. His arms shook as he forced them to make fists, slamming his arms down over Namu's wrists, trying to make it give. His spider legs tried to pry himself loose, but no go. He looked up, finding the titan's leering eyes and grinning sharp-toothed beak staring back at him. Peter fired off a web line onto the monster's exposed brain. But Nomu, with a speed he had not hitherto shown, dodged the shot with a flick of his neck. The suit splintered, cracked and collapsed. He could feel the metal digging into his skin. Every breath felt like it was being sucked through a straw. Then he heard and felt something crack in his chest, sharp pain lancing like fire across his lungs. He arched his back. He tried to scream, but he didn't have the air to do it. "Parker-san," Izuku yelled, face etched in horror. They had managed to get Aizawa-sensei over to a giggling weighing Kaminari by some bushes. But when they had come back to help, the fight was already over. The fight had lasted only seconds, with both Nomu and Peter moving faster than he could imagine. It was just like when that hand guy rushed them. And now Peter was trapped in Namu's grasp, being slowly crushed to death. "Ribbit," Tsuyu whimpered, fearful and despairing. The teal-haired youth leapt back, dodging a sound blast and a paintball volley from Jiru and Yaoyorozu. He landed by Nomu, cackling with evident delight at his evil handiwork. "Not so smart, are you brats?" he yelled. "You should have listened to Eraserhead's advice and ran when you had the chance. Instead, all you did was trade a battered old man for a kid who's gonna be paraplegic soon." Tisk tisk tisk. Izuku gritted his teeth. That damn villain. Let him go. Yaoyorozu yelled. She had her paintball rifle at the ready, and Jiru did likewise with her amp boots. Think, what do I do? Izuku racked his brain, trying to think of something. He had to think of something. Suddenly, the air crackled and rumbled, and Izuku paused. The black miasma formed, 2 golden eyes forming menacingly as the teal-haired psychopath turned his head in acknowledgement. Shigaraki Tamura. Ah, Kurogiri. Is 13 dead? As if he couldn't feel the pit in his stomach get even deeper. No, not 13. Oh no, Su uttered, thinking the same thing as Izuku, eyes wide in horror. 13 is incapacitated for the time being. However, some students were able to evade my mass warp, and subsequently one of them escaped the facility. Wait, someone escaped. Who? Who could have escaped that? The only ones who could outrun the sudden teleportation would be Parker, Kaken, and Ida. It had to have been Ida. Oh, Shigaraki, the black-wearing hands-raped villain tilted his head. Oh ... His hand began to scratch at his neck. Harder and harder as he twitched and groaned louder. Kurogiri, you're so lucky you're my ride out of here, or you'd be so dead. God fucking damn it. Ida escaped. So help was on the way. All Might and the teachers will be coming. Tsuyu chirped, and Izuku felt his heart soar. All Might may have been late for whatever reason, but he would save the day. He knew it. Shigaraki let out a sigh, his arms out in mock defeat. Well shit. Game over. We don't stand a chance against an army of pros. We should leave now, Buot. His head tilted, and Izuku could see his cheekbones rise and his eyes curve with a sick smirk. This little spider is to blame for holding us up with his little tricks. Those bitches and that one All Might wannabe would be splattered across the floor by now otherwise. Nomu. The beast's eyes rose up, paying attention to its master. Kill him. Slowly. No. Izuku gasped, and the beast's hands gripped Peter's abdomen even tighter. Parker struggled, but could not escape as Nomu squeezed tighter and tighter, then slammed him against the ground, so hard that the ground cratered beneath him. Nomu let out a sound, something between a growl and a hiss, slamming Peter into the dirt as the muscles along its arms bulged and bunched. Parker writhed in his grip, hands scrabbling for the monster's fingers. Izuku was close enough to hear him trying to suck down a breath through the mask, the sound like half-choked wheezing and clicks. Let him go. He saw Jiru fire a sound blast, and Yaoyorozu fired another volley, only for them to vanish into a black void as another appeared right in front of him. Midoriya-chan. Tsuyu grabbed him with her tongue and leapt, avoiding the onslaught of paintballs. But no sound came, so Kurogiri could nullify Jiru's earphone jack and negate any ranged attack. They landed back into the central plaza, away from the bushes and trees where Aizawa and Kaminari were lying. Thankfully, the paintballs didn't hit anywhere near them. The suit was groaning, bending and cracking as Nomu crushed the armor like a tin can. A broken stump of a spider leg twitched and scraped along the dirt over Peter's shoulder. Shigaraki laughed. How does it feel? Dying as if under a metal press. If there's anyone to blame, blame All Might. He wasn't here to protect you all. He was supposed to be here, teaching his students, and yet he's absent, letting a poor innocent child die a hero while he's out being a glory-seeking fool, and smiling for the cameras. Any blood shed today is on the hands of the symbol of peace. Ain't that ironic or what? Hiya ha 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 ha. Shigaraki ranted and raved before laughing as Izuku clenched his fist. He had never felt so useless. Parker was dying before him, and he could do nothing. How could he be the world's greatest hero if he couldn't even save? Die. The cry was familiar. 2 of the villains were sent flying as Bakugou Katsuki leapt into the fray, explosions erupting all around him. He landed and aimed both of his grenade gauntlets at Shigaraki and Kurogiri, his face a mask of battle rage. Kurogiri grunted, unimpressed. Nomu did not seem to notice. Only Shigaraki dodged the blasts. Eat this. Kirishima Idru rushed in with his jagged arms, swinging at Shigaraki. The masked youth dodged his strikes before reaching out with his hands. Then a paintball struck him in the shoulder, making him yelp in pain and surprise. Insolent children. Kurogiri hissed as he expanded himself, only for a giant mass of ice spikes to drive into the black mass and stun the black mist villain, making him grunt and warp away before the ice could freeze over. Sorry for the wait. Todoroki Shoto called. He ran from the bushes, standing between Izuku's retreating team and Momo's group. They had effectively surrounded the League of Villains. Now they could counterattack. Peter was dying. She was no fool. She was not so naive as to take his silence for endurance that he could not feel the pain. He did not scream, because his lungs had no air to scream with. His torso was being crushed slowly, squeezed between Nomu's fists. Ribs were surely broken, and more would break until his lungs were punctured and his heart pierced. Think Momo, think Nomu. Quirk, shock absorption, super strength, super speed, obeys commands, great reflexes, all might counter. Shigaraki Tamura. Quirk, unknown, has to involve his hands as he tried to leap in and grab her and Jiru. Tsurajiri. Quirk, some kind of warping, teleportation vortex ability, can transport individuals and mass groups of peoples, can even transfer objects and cancel sound. If he was able to defeat 13, he must have used Black Hole against the pro hero. Think Momo, think. He was dying. Peter Parker was dying because she put him in that situation. Think Momo, think. Todoroki's ice lanced out, grabbing Naomu's legs. Tsurajiri was trying to warp Kirishima and Bakugou, but Bakugou pulled the pin on his grenade gauntlet, and with a roar, fired at the giant mass with an explosive fireball. She heard the villain cry out in agony and dropped them, slinking away. Shigaraki leapt away, and Kirishima's eyes focused on Nomu. Parker, he yelled, don't go in. That black guy is as strong as All Might. Jiru yelled, you won't put a scratch on him. Seriously, what the fuck do? We blast their faces off. That's what. Bakugou race after Tsurajiri, using his turbo boost blasts to chase after the warping villain. Todoroki summoned a segment of ice spires, only for Shigaraki to dodge, and with a touch, disintegrated them. Think Momo, think. She saw Nomu move its legs, tearing his limb free from Todoroki's glacier. It did not so much as grunt, though Momo could see exposed muscles under torn, bleeding flesh. Her gut churned at the sight, and then the flesh reformed over the horrid wounds. High-speed regeneration too. Think. What could defeat such a creature? All Might counter, with regeneration added. How can a person, no, that monster, have multiple quirks? Parker wasn't moving, but he was still alive for the moment. He had to be alive. He couldn't die. He couldn't. Think Momo, think. Think Momo, think. Think Momo, think. Think. What was the best possible situation here? Think. That's it. Everyone. I have a plan. Everyone's eyes were on her. Good. Even Bakugou had an eye on her. Apparently even he was in the mood to listen ... for once. Todoroki, she said, getting the monochrome-haired boy's attention. Use your ice. Everything you have to slow that monster down. Go for his feet. Force him to drop Peter-san. Anything. Shoto nodded, letting out a breath of chilled air as he focused on his target. Bakugou, don't tell me what to do, rich girl. He shrieked, unleashing another wave of explosions into Tsurajiri, the black mass warping it away. But the villain was occupied, at least for the moment. Keep doing what you're doing then. Kirishima, get ready to jump in and grab Peter-san when you find an opening. The red-headed boy didn't even hesitate, nodding and spreading his hardening all over his body, his eyes taking on a serious sheen. Got it. Jiru, Momo called, flinching as another glacier shattered like glass against Namu's backhanded blows, the still form of Peter still tight in its grip. What do you need? Jiru stopped and gritted her teeth, dodging a swipe from the teal-haired psycho before sending another blast of sound at Shigaraki, forcing him to jump back. Keep Shigaraki from giving it orders. Definite. Make sure it can't hear me. The punk girl's eyes almost shot out of their sockets. Are you insane? That thing will. Peter-san's dead if I don't. Momo glared at her comrade, daring her to deny it or to offer some better plan. Jiru did not. They didn't have time. Momo could see the fear in her eyes, and she understood it only too well. It had to be the craziest idea she had ever come up with. But they were heroes in training. Doing crazy things to save people came with the territory. Jiru gritted her teeth and aimed. All right, eat this, ya freaks. Jiru focused everything she had on Nomu and Shigaraki, the bass sound wave washing over them. Momo dashed to the side, her heart pounding in her chest, her skin bubbling with her quirk. She saw Jiru dodge Shigaraki's lunging swipe, Bakugou blasting away, Tsurajiri dodging effortlessly. Momo shook her head. She couldn't get distracted. She had to make this quick or else. The ground shook, almost sending Momo into a tumble. She spared a second to look at what happened, and wished she hadn't. She was behind it, so she got a full view of the awesome power on display. Nomu, the monster, ripping its legs free from Todoroki's ice as it held Parker in his grasp. Without a second thought, it slammed its fist down, ripping a fissure in the earth. With its new leverage, the obsidian titan started ripping chunks out of the ground. The bloodshot eyes of the beaked fiend snapped to Jiru and the rest, and then threw the chunk of debris like a softball pitch. Jiru tried to jump back, but Kirishima dove in front of her, and with a roar, threw his shoulder into the debris and took the hit, the chunk shattering as it impacted. You okay, Jiru? Thanks for the save. I'm fine. Less talking, more base blasting. Jiru followed through on Kirishima's quip, and with a hop, slammed her boots into the ground as her earphone jacks fired another sound wave at Nomu. Momo could barely keep it out, pulling out the results of her quirk, a large wrapped bag about the size of a mason jar. The lid was primed with a fuse, and the underside was coated in the webbing formula. No better adhesive around. Thank you, Peter-san. Momo's skin bubbled with goosebumps, the temperature plummeting with Todoroki's newest ice surge. The beast darted to the right, dodging the river of ice and winding up for another shot. It threw, and Todoroki threw up his hand, ice rising in a wall to guard him. The chunk struck the ice, shattering it like glass, and sending Todoroki flying, rolling across the ground before Asui's tongue scooped him up. Seeing her chance, Momo sprinted straight at Nomu. Kirishima saw her, and he charged too, straight at Namu's front. She saw Jiru ready her boots and conjured earmuffs to cover her ears, just in time as the sound wave crashed over her, her eardrums ringing. Not so fast. Shigaraki caught on and charged straight at Nomu. The brute turned at the sight of its master, ignoring Momo as she approached. Nomu, full blast. Jiru roared. Blood oozed from Namu's ears as the wave struck, sending Shigaraki to the ground, clutching his head in agony as he howled. She jumped as high as she could, her arms barely managing to stick the object against the back of the titan's neck. She kicked off its back, and then flung herself out of reach. The monster jerked, surprised, and Peter fell from its grip, hitting the ground with a thump. I got you. Kirishima leapt in, grabbing Peter and dashing away, his friend over his shoulder like a sack. Shigaraki paused, and glanced up at Nomu with wide eyes, and he chuckled at the sight of the box. What did you think you're gonna do? He stopped, noticing the fuse in her hand. He was so close Momo could hear his gasp and see the moment of understanding in his eyes. Nomu, take that fin. Momo pulled the fuse. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air around Nomu went from 23 Celsius to 25 in the blink of an eye. A miniature sun blossomed on the back of the monster's neck. Momo twisted her head away, blinded by the light, the heat searing her skin. A thermite charge. The standard reaction was 5 times hotter than most fire or heat quirks in general. She had made a point to shape it, channeling all the explosive energy straight into Namu's neck, while adding enough chemicals to bring down a skyscraper. Nothing less would have worked. The charge burned through Namu's upper spine, its chest glowing as the blast reached its core, burning down and up as its head was incinerated. Its legs buckled, and the dreadful thing flopped forward like a dead fish, the fiery glow spreading up through its pectorals and burning open the skin. She could see its insides, its charred and burning lung tissue, the fluttering, beating heart trying desperately to keep blood pumping even as the blood around it boiled and hissed. Then the heart was charred. The monster hit the ground and did not move, only its legs remaining. The stench of burned meat hung at the air, making Momo want to throw up. For a moment, no one moved. Then several things happened at once. Impossible. Kurogiri yelled in utter shock. You're open. Bakugou roared, his hands weaving through and blasting the warp user by his metal brace. The villain shouted in pain and fell to the ground with a crash, Bakugou right on top of him. Shigaraki shrieked, like a toddler throwing a temper tantrum, and charged straight for Kirishima and Peter. Peter-san. Kirishima. Momo yelled. She began to create a paintball rifle, but she couldn't make it in time. She needed time. No you don't. Kirishima yelled, swiping at him. But Shigaraki ducked under the swing and lashed out like a viper, his hand grabbing a hold of his shoulder pads. Gah! The pads faded to dust, and Kirishima jumped back on reflex. Shigaraki's hand swiped at him, before Asui's tongue wrapped around Kirishima's arm and pulled the red-haired boy away, leaving Peter on the ground, helpless before Shigaraki's murderous rage. Momo's heart froze. Oh shit, cried Kirishima as he realized his mistake. Shigaraki grabbed Peter's face and held him up for all to see, his forefinger hovering over Peter's forehead. Peter hung there, seemingly unconscious. Momo let out a cry and dropped her half-made gun, pulling out a metal staff and charging at Shigaraki. But the psychotic was too fast, leaping away from her. Parker, Jiru screamed. Let him go. Kirishima shouted, almost weeping with shame. Bakugou glanced from Kurogiri to Parker, suddenly indecisive. Todoroki landed nearby, as did Asui, eyes wide with dread as they surrounded the villain. All right you brats, bellowed Shigaraki, brandishing Peter's hanging form. Nobody move or this little spider bites the dust. Momo felt her blood freeze. There was nothing she could do. All I need to do is put my index finger down, just a twitch and he's dust. Ya hear me? He spat through gritted teeth. He taps his middle finger against Peter's head, but kept his index finger from touching the metal. Peter-san, how did this happen? How the goddamn hell did this happen? This was so fucking unfair. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Teacher gave him such a nice toy, one to counter everything All Might had. Kurogiri helped as he gathered his own legion of cannon fodder to help take down All Might and whoever was around. Instead, these fucking bastard kids killed Nomu, captured Kurogiri, and forced him to use the little spider as a meat shield. It was cool when Eraserhead was doing his best. Watching the pro get stomped and his bones and face crushed was better than beating any boss on hard mode. Then this little spider decided he wanted to play hero. Give the kid a little credit, he lasted longer than Eraserhead did against his Nomu. But when Nomu crushed him, suddenly all these fucking kids decided to turn up the difficulty and started using cheat codes, as if taking out the spider activated some nightmare mode or trigger. Did they all get kissy kissy kumbaya in only a few days' time? What makes a bug worth ruining all of his fun? Now, Shigaraki Tamura wasn't like Teacher. He couldn't predict every little thing that could come up. Not that he didn't have the power to dust any problems that came his way, but he wasn't an idiot. These kids had delayed them long enough. Kurogiri said one of them got out, so any second now the pros were going to bust down the door for their precious indoctrinated soldiers. He needed to get out of there. Teacher was going to be so disappointed in him. But that was better than letting himself get caught. Except he couldn't. Not unless he made Grenade Brat with the stupid hair let go of Kurogiri. That dumbass bartender better fucking be smart enough to know they had to go, like now. Damn shame too. He'd love to kill that fat titty slut for killing Nomu, but escaping took priority. It was game over. Time was ticking away, so thankfully, he got himself the best key item he could ask for. You, blonde brat, he said, pointing at the grenade asshole, let Kurogiri go. And I'll let your friend go. Equal trade. Fuck that. The brat screamed, we're not gonna take orders from psychopaths like you. Yeah, who do you think we are? The redhead roared. You'd just kill Parker the moment we let your missed friend go. Kid put on a brave face, but Tamura could see the fear in his eyes, in all of their eyes, especially in that skimpy whore. These kids were only playing heroes when one of their own was on the line. They didn't have the resolve to hit him where it counted. All they needed was a little push and they would be nothing. Like scared little children. Like Teacher said, destroy your enemy's hope, and they will crumble around you. You know, my quirk is pretty great, Tamura spoke with a smirk. Ignoring the confused looks of the brats, it's called decay. Everything I wrap all my 5 fingers around fades to dust. Metal, rocks, ice, whatever it is, it turns to ash. He pauses, letting a funny grin spread over his face as he let out a dark chuckle. But what gets really interesting is when I grab hold of soft, tender flesh. Yeah, twist the knife, push it in deeper, make them pause even longer, just enough for Kurogiri to find an opening. Any opening. The redhead flinched back, and even the ice user brat hesitated. I learned a long time ago, you see, my quirk doesn't work as fast as any of you think. In fact, it goes much slower than you'd expect. At least, to the poor sob that it's being used on. You see, it has to go through everything to finish it off. Layer by layer, skin and muscle turn to ash, but not fast enough to stop your nerves from screaming every excruciating inch of flesh falls away. Ask Eraserhead. Tamura took a step forward from his kneeling, hands still on the armored brat's head, and all of the kids save for the blonde stepped back. They were scared, perfect. They were like sheep before the wolf. I wonder what your friend will feel. My fingers so close to his head. Do you think he'll feel his face falling away? His skull crumbling, his brain screaming as he's eaten away inch by inch until there's nothing left. It'll be quick from your perspective. You lifted his hand, snapping his fingers, quick as a snap, and he'll fade away. But for him, it'd feel like an eternity of crumbling away into a pile of powdered bone and ash. And you know what? He stops, cheekbones rising and eyes curving as he couldn't contain his ear-to-ear grin. I really don't know. I've honestly never used my quirk on someone's head like this before. I know. How about we see what it's like together? As the old saying goes, you learn something new every day, right? Yes, yes, yes. The fear in their faces, the color draining from their skin. And isn't this a school, right? Why don't we learn something new together? Tamura couldn't help himself at the sight. The utter hopelessness in their eyes, it was fucking hilarious. He didn't stop the wonderful laughter that slipped through his lips. Kahahaha. You should see the looks on your faces. Tamura cackled loudly and proudly, guffawing. Yes, he has these pathetic brats by the balls. This power, this feeling of authority. He's never felt a high like this in his life. No wonder Teacher was so good at this. He savored the sound for a second, sighing and calming down before looking at the explosive kid, who was looking on in morbid horror with clenched teeth. Heroism, always good for a laugh. So, anytime you want to let Kurogiri go, the sooner you can fix your broken Spider-Man here. Tamura cooed. Don't you want to save him or what? His breathing doesn't sound too healthy right now. Might need to get him some help real fast, lest he drown in his blood. The blonde flinched but kept his palms firmly on Kurogiri. You think I'm an idiot? The kid screamed. Why would you let him go? He's just trash to you. Second this guy's free, you'll kill him. Tamura narrowed his eyes. Kid was right. This bug was too much trouble to keep around. If he matures, he'd be trouble down the road too. Plus, he pissed him off. He didn't deserve to breathe for the crap that he put Tamura through. The leader of the League of Villains forced a shrug. Now why would I do that? He asked. I'm only trying to get away from you horrible heroes after all. He looked around, taking in the broken central plaza and shattered remains of the mini glacier, the charred remains of Nomu. After all, if this is what the heroes of tomorrow will do to cities and its ne'er-do-wells. Tamura spat out the word, gritting his teeth as he glared hard at the kids, and he remembered. The old days. What the fuck has this world come to? The blonde grit his teeth, a line of sweat running down his brow. Tamura stared him down, his index finger moving ever closer to the bug's neck. If he killed him now, their shock might give them enough time for Kurogiri to make a mass warp, getting the brats far away from here. Then he and the bartender could escape. He has no idea if those thugs had killed any more of the students, but his index finger began to fall. He felt the armored spider brat below him vibrate and shake harder, and he can see their mouths opening as time slowed down. Tamura's eye curved in a sick glee. I win. Only to stop when the door to the building exploded, sending shockwaves through the USJ. Everyone turned to the door as a mountainous figure stepped out of the smoke, standing at the top of the stairs overlooking the plaza. The great symbol of peace, gritting his teeth, not a smile in sight. Tamura felt his hope plummet. His blood ran as cold as the Arctic Sea. He had to get out of there, he had to. Maybe if he sprinted towards the blonde now Then something exploded behind him as he realized there was one brat unaccounted for. The last thing Peter saw before the suit went dark was Todoroki's ice swallow up the Namu's legs and waist. Then there was nothing he could see, nothing he could do. He couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. He felt blood in his mouth. It felt sticky on his chin and neck. Fire burned through his chest. Every breath was agony as he felt yet another crunch rattle through his diaphragm, increasing the agony tenfold. The suit's warning signs flashed red in front of his eyes, diagrams and blueprints highlighting the damage. His eyes swam in his skull as he tried to read the data, feeling shards of metal slicing up his stomach, sides and back, digging into him as the monster kept tightening its grip. What did Nomu do? What system did it break? Power converter, motor control, neural uplink. Then the suit was disabled. His HUD going dark. Peter's brain was fogged, vision blurry, the words too small for him to read as dark crept at the edge of his eyes. He couldn't move. He couldn't move. He was trapped in a dark metal coffin and he couldn't move. Before it was like a python tightening its grip around his spine and lungs. Now it was like a demolishing press, and even if he could move he doubted he'd have the strength to fight back. He tried to wiggle, to move, anything, but the beast only pressed down harder. Pain was all he knew. He couldn't hear a thing. He couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He had to escape. But he couldn't escape the fact that he was dying. Again. No, not again. He felt the pinpricks before back then. It was happening again. Again, he couldn't do a thing. Again, all he knew was endless torture, trapped in Mr. Stark's suit. The suit he wore when being made an Avenger. I don't want to die. Again. Save me. Someone. Help me. Please. Anybody. Peter thought, words not forming as he coughed lightly again, trying his utmost to move before he felt himself be lifted off the ground and swayed around like a rag doll in the beast's grasp. It was like being on a one-person wild ride at an amusement park, but blindfolded and with perforated lungs. He couldn't make out the voices, the pain was too much. Were his classmates fighting? Were they fighting to save him? Peter couldn't breathe as he heard the sound of a heavy bass wash over him, the suit muffling out the heavy sound wave. He coughed again, more blood caking his mouth and nose. Was he going to drown in his own blood? Then he felt himself free, the Nomu letting go before someone else's hands caught him. It made Peter wince and he would have howled in discomfort had he been able to speak and not have the taste of metal in his mouth. I got you. That voice. It was muffled but, through the pain, Peter recognized it. Izuku. He felt him move as he was draped over Izuku's back, then he stopped. He tried to move, lift an arm, but his suit couldn't. And even if he did, he felt his ribs contract and he coughed more again. The redhead was now standing still, and the goosebumps faded before it came roaring back, and Izuku was wildly moving again, as if he was trying to dodge. Who was it? He hit the floor, head cracking against the ground as Peter's eyes widened as white-hot pain seared through his body like a fire poker was jammed through this spine. And the voice in the back of his head was telling to him, you can run, but he can't. He was too weak, too tired, too hurt. As he laid on the ground, Peter felt fingers on his crown and the goosebumps were erect and on all ends. This feeling, only back on Titan. Before he died, his heart stopped and he froze. He was able to make out noises. He can just hear Momo and Jiru and Izaru. He closed his eyes, and Peter did his best to listen, as hard and as acute as he could. You, blonde. It was light, but raspy. It sounded like Handy. Let Kurogiri go, and I'll let your friend go. Blonde, bakugou. He had the missed villain then. Fuck that. He felt his heart drop, a coiling, insidious fear wrapping around his chest. He was going to die. He was going to die again. Peter felt a pressure at the forehead of his mask, a single finger pressing down. You know, my quirk is pretty great. It's called decay. Everything fades to dust. Metal, rocks, ice, whatever it is, it turns to ash. All of a sudden, Peter couldn't breathe. Not because he tried, but because his entire body was locked. No. His heart stopped. His body froze. Yet the tingling feeling only increased. No longer was it goosebumps. It was mixing in with the pain of his abdomen. Please no. Turn to ash. Help me. Do you think he'll feel his face falling away? His skull crumbling, his brain screaming as he's eaten away inch by inch until there's nothing left. It'll be quick from your perspective. Aunt May, a snap of a finger, ... and he'll fade away into a pile of powdered bone and ash. And you know what, Mr. Stark? Peter can't breathe. The goosebumps has become like the needles digging into each square centimeter of his skin. The fingers on his head. He was doomed to die. I don't want to go. 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 No one was going to save him. No one was going to help him. Momo and the others couldn't move due to the hostage situation. Bakugou said no. He was going to die. I don't want to go. 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 Help, please. I don't want to go. 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 Peter felt the hairs on his body go ramrod, as he can sense, as if awakening something, his entire body in the darkness. He can see himself, the 4 fingers attached, the arm, the body, and the sick demented, dry and chapped grin of Handy as the index finger was falling down. Time began to slow. He could see every outline of his face, his eyes leering in evil delight as the finger came down. He remembered the dark orange sky, Mr. Stark's arms wrapped around him. The cold dead ground. Chief Fukuda, Tony, Izaru, Mina, Ibara, Setsuna, Tenya, Denki, Shoji, Mr. Aizawa, Midoriya, Mr. All Might, Jiru, Momo. I'm sorry. Then the entire picture in his mind of the sonar-like vision of Handy became frazzled. He saw him turn, face no longer in sick demented glee, but in pure despair and horror, mouth open wide, as were his eyes. Detroit. He heard a voice, piercing the darkness, like a beacon, loud and almost shrill. Midoriya Izuku. Toshinori Yagi felt his rare temper start to boil. Young Ida explained the situation as well as he could. The poor boy looked like he had run for his life, and looking out among the field of the former training center, he had. In the central plaza, the #1 hero saw the dozens of downed villains and a few scattered about, staying clear from the fight. In the distance, a cracked and shattered battlefield of broken ice and fissured floors. 13 was surrounded by her students, her back ripped open from something, possibly her own quirk. He saw young Uraraka and young Ishido escort an incapacitated Kaminari up the stairs by the time he arrived. He felt the eyes of the children upon him. Tears of relief fell freely from their faces, screaming his arrival. It made his fist clench. This wasn't a training compound, this was a war zone. These villains did this to his students because he didn't take Tsukachi's advice on hiring a personal driver to take him to work to reserve his time limit, because he wouldn't have faith in the local hero firms in handling criminals that he had to step in, because he was stubborn and wanted to do everything himself, just as Sorahiko said years ago. He couldn't be here because of all of that. What kind of hero was he, letting Aizawa and 13 fight this alone? And the children. He knew what it was like to see this kind of despair, to fight against an enemy they had no reasonable way to beat but fighting all the same. He was in their shoes once before, and it cost him dearly, but they were younger than he was. Too young. Don't worry, students, it will be all right. He ripped his tie off, his teeth bared as his temper seethed to the surface. Because I am here. As the cries of relief from his students were drowned out, a blast that could only come from one for all echoed throughout the clearing. Yagi was moving before young Uraraka could even turn her head. He was at the bottom of the stairwell in an instant, fists ready to deliver a smash to the first villain that presented themselves. Only, he was too late. A villian, at least, Yagi hoped so, skipped along the floor of the plaza like a stone on a pond. literal hands fell from him, and blood poured free from a smashed and broken face. Shigaraki, came a deep voice, and the black mask that was under a distracted young bakugou got out and disappeared. Wait, he warped. Then, a misama of black mist caught the ailing Shigaraki, holding the limp body within its tendrils. From the mass, a set of yellow eyes widened as they looked at Yagi. The black mist pulled the villian in, the warp user that young Ada mentioned. No you don't. He rushed forward, throwing a Texas smash towards the duo, but the warp villain was ready. Like a draining sink, it pulled both the smash with a frontal vortex and conjured a larger warp behind it. No, Yagi bolted, gusts of wind following in his wake as he tried to catch them. Alas, in the blink of an eye, they were gone. Yagi felt his teeth grind together. All might. Yagi's eyes snapped over, and the knife in his chest twisted as his dark and blue eyes widened. He rushed over to his broken and mangled successor, but the boy shook his head. Parker-san, he stammered, doing his best to hold back the pain. Yagi followed the boy's gaze. He thought he couldn't feel worse. He was wrong. Immediately, he went over to the group of young Todoroki, young Yaoyorozu, and young Kirishima who were kneeling in front of the unmoving form of Peter Parker. His once marvelous red and gold suit was peeling like a shell to reveal torn clothes and barely visible bruising. Todoroki saw him arrive and motioned for Yaoyorozu to move to the side. The young woman was shaking, but she allowed All Might space as he approached. Now closer, he could see that the light that used to shine over the eyes was gone. Even the rest of the color in the suit was muted like some kind of sick joke. He hasn't moved, young Todoroki explained, but he's breathing, if barely. We need to get him out. Now, don't worry, I am here, he's going to be fine. Yaoyorozu had skin that's peeling around her. Burns must have been close to a rather intense source of heat. Kirishima was the same, as he rubbed his arms and was silent, eyes filled with concern. His words had the desired effect, as Yagi felt a will of steel harden his resolve as he went to work. Yagi pressed his fingers against the metal at the open bits and began to peel it away, tearing off the scraps. The only thing that seemingly held it together was prayers and the gentleness of his peers. He can hear young Jiru approach with young Asui. He ripped the remains of his mask, and as soon as he did, he heard young Yaoyorozu gasp. The boy's eyes were half-lidded, and mouth and chin caked red with blood. His breath hoarse and ragged. His ribs must be broken and his lungs feeling the pressure. He groaned out weakly. Parker's eyes looked up, closing again due to the glare from the light. Ever, he coughed, blood dripping down his lip. Don't talk, just breathe, young Parker. I am here, he assured the boy as he put a hand to cup his cheek. He turned towards the other students. What happened to him? Yagi asked. Yaoyorozu remained silent, looking away with her closed eyes. Kirishima was staring at the floor, hoping for it to bury him. Todoroki's eyes hardened and he looked at the still burning legs sitting there on the ground. He fought against that, Todoroki said, jerking his head to the remains. The villains called it a Nomu. According to them, it was a monster designed by the villains to fight you and kill you. Todoroki's gaze softened at Parker as All Might turned over the wounded American, his hands going over to continue taking off the armor around his chest and arms. Parker was the one to stall it. Against him, they really went this far just for a shot at him. He grit his teeth, fading into a visage of fury as the students slinked at the sight. Those monsters. And young Parker paid the price for his altruism. Young Bakugou finally walked over, joining the group as All Might continued to scrape away the thin armor, seeing Parker's bruised chest. Bastard got the crap beaten out of him. That's what happened, young Bakugou stated. Todoroki came with a sideways glance, eyes narrowing. Jiru bared her teeth, ready to snap before All Might spoke out. Whatever the case, it doesn't matter, Yagi said, bringing everyone's attention back to him and diverting a finger-pointer fest. Young Parker and Midoriya need medical attention, and your peers need assistance. Yaoyorozu, can you create a stretcher for the two of them? Alright, Yaoyorozu spoke for the first time. Kirishima, Yagi continued. The redhead perked up at the mention of his name. You and young Bakugou need to carry them to the entrance. Rendezvous with your classmates there and wait for the teachers and first responders. I'll ensure the rest of your classmates are safe. Yes sir, the students, minus Bakugou, echoed. The young blaster was still looking down at Parker, his face a picture of indifference. But his hands, he has to clench them to stop them from shaking. The boy was scared, just unwilling to show it. His eyes narrowed, face contorting into one of concern, self-loathing, and anger, biting his lower lip before taking a deep breath as Yagi saw Asui gently pick up Midoriya and carry him over. Next to him, young Yaoyorozu was finished. As gently as he could, Yagi tenderly picked up Peter and placed him on the stretcher. "Keep them steady," Yagi instructed. "No quick movements. It will only make things worse." Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, use everything you can to mitigate their injuries until the ambulances arrive. "Yes, sir," they said, each of them taking a different end of Parker's stretcher. "Bakugou," Yagi started. "Yeah, I'll keep an eye on them for you," Bakugou growled, taking the front end of Midoriya's stretcher. Todoroki took the other end. "You're gonna be okay, man. Just hang tough, just look at me, okay?" Kirishima yelled, holding Parker's stretcher as he and Momo carried the wounded American. Todoroki helped with his end, remaining silent. "Don't go to sleep, just look at us, Peter-san. Please hang on," she said in a hurried tone, ignoring her peeling skin and the pain that was causing. Without a word, the group set off with their respective passengers, taking Yagi's words to heart and slowly ascending the stairs. Yagi, on the other hand, swept his gaze throughout the plaza. The other small villains had dispersed, obviously trying to hide from him. He clenched a fist. To hell with only having a few more minutes left. He had work to do. A moment earlier, in the dark was peace and comfort. He felt at ease, calm as he can hear the drip of the IV pouring into him. He couldn't see the screens before him, but he can sense everything around him for dozens of meters. The faint twitches of his and the good doctor's creations within their tanks. The whirring of the machinery. He had the radios on in the background, ears perked and ready to receive any sort of news or tidbit. He heard the air crack. He's heard this before. His scarred hand pushed on the button for the seat to climb up, and he can see the miasma forming and cracking. And then a thud, and the symbol of evil sprung to his feet as the smell of blood was in the air. Kurogiri had explicit instructions on only to warp to his private domicile in case of an emergency. The fact that he is here, Tamura, all for one muttered as he got out of his throne, still dressed in a hospital gown as he walked with his IV fluid rack. He can see him. Oh, Tamura. He can see the outline. Tamura twitching, gasping in sheer agony as his nose was pointing the other way as if Pinocchio had his long nose pointing 90 degrees. Most of his top row of teeth were either gone or shattered, blood oozing from his lips. He got down to his knees, placing a hand on Tamura's shoulder. Then came a cranky old voice. "What's going on?" "My sensors are." "Enough, doctor. This matter doesn't concern you." All for one spoke, and the doctor remained silent over the intercom. He turned towards his faithful servant as he picked up the whimpering and ailing youth and placed him on the bed, feeling his IV remove itself in the process. The bald and scarred king of crime saw his black masked comrade float to the other side, his golden eyes low and nearly closed in regret. Teach, Tamura uttered, hand outreached. All for one took it, and on reflex, Tamura's thumb went out as their hands interclasped. "Don't talk, Tamura. Save your strength," he said calmly and soothingly. He lifted a hand, and the black and red prongs of his quirk went down, piercing the teal-haired youth's face painlessly as he got to work. All for one took a deep breath, and he focused his blind gaze upon Kurogiri. If Tamura was here in this state, then, I assume by your silence, the mission was a failure, he said rhetorically. Tamura was trained well to keep up with the most agile of pros. He had no experience, but his floor was far higher than any child attending UA Academy. "Yes, sir," Kurogiri replied as the black and red lines from All for One's fingers glowed in the dark, alongside the computer screens behind the tall man. He let out a sigh. "All Might, always the thorn at my side it seems." "Sir, if I may." Kurogiri hesitated. "We followed the schedule that we acquired from your intelligence sources. We even jammed the facility and its communications. But," his golden eyes looked down, "All Might was not present." All for One opened his mouth with a click, then closed it, then looked down at Tamura, whose eyes was becoming half-lidded. The side effect of morphine touch, regeneration, bone regrowth, and all other sorts of quirks. He'll be sleeping like a baby for the next couple of days. "I see. So, the 100+ thugs you and Tamura recruited failed, as did the Nomu I designed to hold down All Might." "Yes, sir." I am sorry, sir. The students at UA are more trouble than even we had anticipated. Some of them were able to defeat the ruffians we coerced and came upon me, Tamura, and the Nomu." Her, Tamura uttered, slurring under the morphine and the stamina drain from the healing. "I hold until all height." He can see his eyes water up. Those same eyes of shame, self-loathing, and despair. The same he saw when he was a scared little boy. With his free hand, All for One petted Tamura's crown, and he offered a soft and warm expression. "It is all right, Tamura. I'm not angry or disappointed. I am only glad that you and Kurogiri are alive and not captured. Please, just rest. Know that you are in safe hands." "Will he be staying here?" the mist villain asked. The healing will take time, as it will consume his stamina. I will have the doctor hook him to an IV to help with the process. My quirks are doing their job. So, all for one turned towards his minion. How did my Nomu get killed? The good doctor won't be pleased. He put in a lot of effort into creating that. He let out a sigh. Such a shame. Tirajiri didn't have shoulders, but the symbol of evil could see his body. This language give off a similar slumping air. The students concocted a plan. At first they were only half a dozen, then reinforcements came as they joined the fight. Their quirks were quite troublesome indeed. His golden eyes narrowed as a black tendril rubbed his metal brace. Very troublesome. They have to be in order to pin you down, along with killing the Nomu. I don't recall any student of Class 1 having a quirk that could do realistic damage to Nomu outside of the electric user or Endeavor's son. It was neither, although Todoroki Shoto had a hand in delaying me and Nomu. At first, an armored student stalled Nomu for a time, but it allowed the others to intervene. Students with explosion quirks, frog-like abilities. There was even a girl with a quirk that appeared to bring forth any item. Might be a storage-related ability or based in chemistry. Oh, all for one smirked. Well now, something just piqued his interest. Like, she was able to kill Nomu with a thermite charge that she had created from her body. Right on the nape of the neck, incinerated the brain and the heart. To say nothing of the spine going out too simultaneously. The scarred blind man let out a chuckle. Seems the heroes of tomorrow are becoming quite ruthless it seems. I has Hose. Tamura slurred, his teeth almost regrowing as his eyes focused on them. As all for one looked down, he can see it, within those red eyes, even through all the morphine. Hate burned like hellfire, and he couldn't hold back his smirk. He'll be knocked out before long. The poor boy needs a rant. And who are those three? Name them, Tamura. Name them so you can etch them into your mind, so that you may seek vengeance for your failure. Learn from it, Tamura, and become better, stronger for it. Besides, he needs a helpful push. All heard, fame's henthiant. Ham gonna hhccccch kakarap. The youth slurred, his fists clenching as his teeth regrew. The one who attacked him he haul height anub. See couldn't catch his name hut heil you remember his stupid fucking face. Exploding that head. Henva's kid. And then the hone who hauled en humu. The hearse dominu he growled, even under the influence, eyes widening in hate. He growled, his new teeth together, able to enunciate a little better. Those kids. And his eyes lit up with one last burst of energy as he roared at the top of his lungs. And all for one couldn't hold back his toothy grin. Yes, child, let hate be your guide. Vengeance is a powerful motivator. It will drive you to your goal. Let it fester. Let it grow like a wildfire, Tamura. I started the downfall of this hero society. I will kill them all, and you will finish every last fucking one of them. What I started. Izuku winced as he felt Recovery Girl's lips upon him after he had been kissed. He was now being carried out as he looked over at Parker. He had been kissed first by the head nurse. She hadn't said a word, acting fast as she smooched the American, and the nurses began to lift him up. Izuku felt himself be carried up, and he saw the ambulance to the side as the first responders began to swarm the facility, talking to his classmates. Mr. Aizawa and 13 were being looked at by Recovery Girl now, the diminutive woman giving no time to give Izuku any lectures on his quirk, although he had a feeling that would come later. He can feel the stamina drain hit him as he saw Ida and Uraraka close in on him. We'll come by Deku, I promise, Uraraka said. The green-haired boy let out a sigh and a thumbs up with his good hand before he felt himself be raised into an ambulance, and he drifted off the moment he heard the van's sirens scream. Yagi couldn't help but sigh at the clock in front of him. 3 hours, is that how long it's been? Just a measly 3 hours and so much had happened. Word got out about the attack on the USJ, not that Yagi was surprised. An entire class of students ends up being attacked by a group of villains, an organized group of villains no less. It was only a matter of time before the story got out to the general public. Then it became a national story. Principal Nezu was putting his genius to good work. The mouse hadn't left the briefing room since the children had been taken home. He talked to police, news outlets, fellow heroes, and worst of all, concerned citizens. An official press conference will be released within the week, but an official statement of how they are evaluating and checking on the well-being of their students came first, along with putting a plan into motion on how to improve security. These were made from social media, with Nezu only providing a few sound bites. He wanted time to prepare. The media sure as hell wasn't giving it to him. Hotels were booked all over Musutafu as news outlets from all over Japan were camped outside of UA. Academy grilling any faculty member or student leaving campus after hours for comments. Nezu had the school go on a break so they can give the students time to heal, effectively canceling school until it was safe to return. The teachers would give the students online assignments, although the hero courses were being thoroughly vetted, Class 1 especially. Yagi had to stomach not confronting the media. This was stirring within the media on why All Might wasn't available for comment, and Nezu's response via social media was curt, in which answers to many questions will be made at the press conference. Yagi made a social post in hopes that it would quiet down the buzzards. As a UA faculty member, I am not at liberty to discuss the school's position at this time. We will discuss the unfortunate incident very soon. If he had given them the truth, the board of directors would have thrown him and his boss the book. All Might was late due to being given a lecture due to him being tardy and burning up his time limit. That was the truth. Nezu has had a face of iron during the last day or so, but Yagi can tell he felt just as guilty as he. First order of business was to interview all of the students, the priority being the ones involved in the Central Plaza first before going to the other students. Once they have vetted the Central Plaza students, then Yagi and Nezu can deliver a general press conference, and pray that would be enough to sate the media's hunger. He stifled a building groan. God, this was all his fault. He allowed children to fight killers, thieves, thugs, a sociopathic decay user, a warp user, and a biological monstrosity designed just to kill him. No hero should have had their first time in combat at this age. There shouldn't even have been a first time. This was a school, not a hero firm. Yagi slammed his hand down on the counter in front of him, his skeletal fingers shaking from the impact. All for One was laughing out there. He just knew it. All Might, the oh-so-great symbol of peace and justice, late to save his own students from what he was training them to fight. Protecting them was supposed to be the one part of this teaching job that he could get right. Yet, he looked down at the stack of paperwork in front of him, curriculum for before and after the UA Sports Festival. They were pretty bare bones if he was being frank. Simple stuff to make sure that he didn't go over his time, to give him more time to spend as symbol of peace outside the walls of the school. Helped the city as best he could, while his students trudged along and his co-workers put in the heavy lifting around the school. The thought made Yagi sigh. All in all, it wasn't the worst way to phrase try to ignore your problems and let us handle it he'd heard. But it was up there. Gods, what would Nana do in this situation? He glanced down at the student information. Names, quirks, addresses. His eyes stopped at the last line, reading off the street names and zip codes. A text is here. Came his phone, and Yagi looked at it. Midoriya is awake. Want to see him. It was from Suzenji Chiyo, recovery girl. Well, might as well start close. He got out of his office and walked through UA's vacant halls. The sun shined through the wall-to-wall windows leading out to empty front lot. A good thing. The less people he had to talk to outside of his All Might form the better. Even so, in his skinny body his footsteps echoed throughout the hall. Geez, when was the last time the school was this quiet? Yagi couldn't remember any time during his tenure that the school needed to be cancelled for anything. Yet they bucked that trend within a week of classes. He rolled his eyes as he descended the last set of stairs getting him to the first floor. At this point he was on autopilot, his feet walking the rest of him down the hall while his mind continued to wonder. What the heck else could he do with the time that he had? He could barely teach the class with the time he had, and anything beyond that felt like a pipe dream. Midoriya was the only student that he could teach in his skeletal form. But that would just be neglectful for everyone else. Yagi stopped in front of the door and felt his shoulders slump. His sensei made this look so much easier, why couldn't he? Opening the door, Yagi caught a glimpse of young Midoriya in closest to the window. In the bed adjacent, young Parker was still out like a light. IVs hooked him as monitors beeped. That's odd. All Might, Midoriya chirped up, and the blonde skeletal man waved. Hey. Yagi spoke back weakly with a smile. He noticed Chiyo's closed eye gaze, her frown deepening. Oh boy, here it comes. So, how you doing? He asked. Well, still a bit tired and weak, but I'm okay otherwise. I'm letting him stay until I know for sure he can walk safely on his own. The entire school is swamped with police and media, Chiyo muttered as she looked out the window, seeing the morass of vans, buses, and other vehicles. He's already gone and got himself hurt. She opened an eye, staring hard at All Might. Thanks in large part to no teaching and refinement. Yagi grunted. I know. I need to be on the ball next time. His gaze went towards young Parker. He was in a gown, but the blonde man can see numerous wraps and bandages around his chest. His heart clenched at the sight, but the gears in his head were turning. Peter Parker was one of the strongest and most able students in Class 1A. Why isn't he healing? How come young Parker isn't awake yet? You did heal him, yes. Yagi turned towards recovery girl, who let out a sigh. Parker is healing, yes, but it's going at a snail's pace. Remember, my quirk needs stamina to use as fuel to help with the healing of the body. Parker has none. He's practically running on fumes. When I noticed this, I had my staff do an MRI on him. His muscle and bone structure are fine, outside of his broken ribs and stressed lungs, but it was his brain all might. Shio took off her glasses, rubbing her eyes. His brain looked exhausted, activity flaring to simply ensure the body would keep up. I've only seen this in extreme insomniacs. Excuse me, but Midoriya spoke out. Parker-san did look rather sleepy today. Did he look like this any time prior? Shio asked as she turned towards his successor. Midoriya bit his lip. No, not at all. He was always active and fine. Until today. It was like he did an all-nighter for some reason. He crashed, if I had to guess. Shio frowned. I informed his guardian of his status over the phone, so she will be here soon. She crossed her arms. I'll give her a piece of my mind then. The boy has the brain of someone who has stayed up far too long with too little sleep. But that doesn't make sense. I've never seen him have any energy drinks, well, from what I can see. Midoriya added. There has to be a reason. The boy hasn't had sleep, but was able to brush it off because of his physiology. His muscle structures going from the MRI alone were incredible. He has the body of a hero in their prime. Shio turned in her chair, bringing up an X-ray on her computer. This may be due to his spider quirk, if I had to guess. Yagi sighed. Poor kid. He turned towards Midoriya next. Midoriya, I'm sorry I wasn't here on time to save you and the other students. He frowned. I did something idiotic, and I was delayed because of it. He said. He couldn't even keep his head up, the shame forcing his gaze down. I burnt most of my time in my hero form doing heroic deeds on my commute. Midoriya bit his lip. I see. The boy said slowly, shifting in his seats. He tried to crack a grin. It's okay, All Might. I'm sure you meant no harm and it's on me regardless, Yagi interrupted, his voice low, because I didn't realize my own limits and didn't put my faith in my contemporaries. You all suffered. No child should have gone what you, Parker, or anyone else in your class had to go through. Yagi stated, eyes closed. It was all my fault. Shio hummed. I know the old mouse gave you a good talk, but I felt it wasn't enough to get the point home, even if you're new here. Yagi flinched, gripping his fists for the verbal lashing that was to come. The old lady sighed. But I can see it in your eyes and your body language. Me piling on wouldn't help your confidence and self-esteem now. You just have to build yourself up. She turned back towards her computer. Be better, All Might. We don't know if there will be a next time. Alright, yes ma'am. Yagi stood at attention. She really hasn't changed back from the old days. He can feel Midoriya's gaze on him, and Yagi pulled a chair and sat next to him. So, Midoriya. He leaned forward, arms resting on his knees. How are you holding up? Yagi did his best to offer a toothy grin. Izuku bit his lip and looked down. Well, you see, I know I'll be okay, but I'm worried for Parker-san, mostly. Yagi had a rueful chuckle. You haven't changed. Always worrying for others over yourself. How so? I mean, you were placed in a dangerous situation. Well, to be fair, I have experience already. What with the sludge villain and, to be honest, I didn't do much. All I did was throw 2 punches. One of them failed against that Nomu. Oh yeah, when I punched him, All Might, I didn't have backlash. Shio turned, and All Might perked up. You didn't get hurt when you hit him. In any other context, that probably would have made Yaga's day. Now, however, he could only watch as Midoriya thought, his fingers moving like he was writing in an invisible notebook. Yeah, but I don't know why. Izuku held out his hand, clenching it as he looked at its scars. Yagi felt a pinprick puncture his heart. Maybe something was different since all I wanted was for them to be blown away. To get them away from my classmates. Maybe, from that I unconsciously managed to prevent the egg in the microwave from exploding. Yagi coughed out blood and laughed. God, he can't stop laughing over such an analogy. It was still so boring and bland, but unique, so fitting of young Midoriya. Sorry, please continue. Well, the boy said, flushing in embarrassment. It's just a theory cause when I struck Shigaraki. Midoriya clenched his fist. I still felt my arm go, but it wasn't as bad as that time I fought Kaken or the zero-pointer robot. If those times I was at 100%, maybe I was at 50, 40 maybe. Yagi honestly didn't know what to think. To think that Midoriya had gotten this much better with his quirk this fast. A live fire situation was the last thing he could have done to Midoriya, but in the end his successor thrived and grew from it, in his own way. Maybe, Yagi admitted, taking a seat on the edge of the bed, although I'd wager it was far less given how that villain's head wasn't an exploding melon. I guess in his case, his head really was the egg and you were the microwave, Yagi said with a smile and a pointed finger. A bit morbid of an analogy there, Toshinori, Chiyo muttered. All Might perked up and slumped up. Wow, that was morbid. Sorry. He rubbed the back of his head. So anyway, Midori, where is he? Where is Peter? Called out a female voice, and Yaga's blood froze. On instinct he jumped to his feet just as the door to the nurse's office exploded. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 6. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.